subscribe, like the video, and, if possible, join Patreon. But if you don't have much money, you can support the channel by watching the novels on euroaudiobooks.com. Remember that you can participate in the polls so that your favorite novel gets published for free.
Immediately collapsed, and rubble continued to roll down from the mountain. The bodies of Erza and Mira Jane were also sent flying by this violent impact, and they hit the ground heavily. Because the place where the three of them stood was relatively open, the gravel did not fall near here. The ground is cracked, and there are long and narrow cracks everywhere. Erza and Mira Jane spat blood from their mouths and felt severe pain all over their bodies. Gritting his teeth, he wanted to stand up from the ground, but his limbs had no strength at all. This is because Luo Zhen didn't use all his strength, otherwise he would have killed both of them in one blow. After a long time, neither of them showed signs of standing up. Luo Zhen spread his hands helplessly, looked at the two people who were about to pass out, and said, "Since you have no strength to stand up, I have to announce that no one passed the assessment this time." Saying that, Luo Zhen was about to turn around. "Stop!" Suddenly, Erza's weak but firm voice came from behind. Turning around, I saw Erza and Mira Jane supporting each other and stood up, gritted their teeth. We haven't lost yet." Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. Erza gritted his teeth and spat out a sentence from his mouth intermittently. Because of the original work of the diamond armor, Erza suffered less injuries. Mira Jane was about to faint, but her unyielding will made her stare at Luo Zhen with her eyes wide open. Seeing the two supporting each other to stand up, Luo Zhen was a little surprised. With a smile on his face, he watched his body shaking slightly, as if a gust of wind could blow them down. "Congratulations, you passed." Hearing the words in Luo Zhen's mouth, Mira Jane's tense nerves were immediately relaxed. When he rolled his eyes, he fainted. The same was true for Erza. After forcing out a smile, he fell straight behind him. Really, just as their bodies were about to fall to the ground, Luo Zhen's figure appeared behind them. He lifted the two of them up by holding their backs. "Zeus!" With a loud shout, an afterimage of white galloped in the air. "Go back to the guild. Put the two on the body of Zeus," Luo Zhen said with a chuckle. Zeus was also taken aback when he first saw the two people covered in wounds. But after hearing Luo Zhen's order, Zeus didn't dare to neglect and quickly led the two of them towards Fairy Tale. Chapter 26, I Beat Them All. 10-year mission. Follow the two back to Fairy Tale. Before arriving at the guild, I saw everyone gathered in the square at the entrance of the guild from a distance. Because of the violent vibration and explosion just now, all the residents of Magnolia ran outside. Includes all members of Fairy Tale. Under the gaze of many people, the big mountain to the south of Magnolia collapsed. Fortunately, there were no villages around, and it was far from Magnolia, so the common people were not affected. In midair, Luo Zhen jumped down and landed heavily on the door of Fairy Tale. Falling to the ground, without waiting for Mrs. Carlos to ask, Luo Zhen shouted at Mrs. Carlos, "President, Erza and Mira Jane are injured. Find a doctor." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, the groom Carlo was startled and ran out quickly. Just when Zeus landed at the door, seeing the injuries of the second daughter on Zeus, Carlos took a deep breath. Such a serious injury. Both had been knocked unconscious. Mira Jane rolled her eyes, and her head fell to the side. If it wasn't for breathing, Ma Karloff even thought that Mira Jane had been beaten to death. Wait, how come the wounds of the two of them seemed to have been caused by the same attack? After checking it, luckily there was nothing serious. Karloff the horse heaved a sigh of relief. Then with a serious face, he turned around and asked Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen nodded with a bright smile on his face, said, "As expected of the president, you are really sharp-eyed. Both of them were beaten like this by me." Luo Zhen scratched his head and looked away. As Luo Zhen's voice fell, the entire guild fell silent. If eyes could speak, then there must be a voice in the guild at this moment. "You are a devil." Erza and Mira Jane looked as if they were dying. If it weren't for the fact that Ma Karloff said that his life was not in danger, they would have already started to worry. "President, don't worry. I know it well." Looking at the silent horseman Carlo, Luo Zhen couldn't help but smile awkwardly and said with a bright smile, "Forget it. Send the two of them to the hospital first, and come back and tell me what's going on." Glaring at Luo Zhen, Ma Carlos still didn't pursue this matter with Luo Zhen now. Luo Zhen nodded and waved Zeus to follow Mao's figure to the guild. Since Fairy Tale is located in the center of Magnolia, the hospital is not too far away. After sending the two daughters to the hospital, two members of the guild stayed behind to guard the hospital. When Luo Zhen returned to the guild, he immediately saw the serious-looking Carlo the horseman. Luo Zhen didn't hide anything either and told Carlos Ma the whole story. Listening to what Luo Zhen said, Mrs. Carlo frowned deeply. So, the final result is that both of them are standing. After being silent for a long time, Carlos the horse let out a foul breath, raised his head, and asked Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen nodded and said, "I thought it was impossible for them to stand under that move. Even if they stood, there would only be one of them. I underestimated their will. I knew I would have worked harder." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, the groom immediately jumped up, slapped Luo Zhen's arm with his palm, and shouted loudly, "Stinky boy, work harder. Aren't you afraid of killing Erza and Mira Jane?" "So I know what's in my heart." Luo Zhen shrugged, looking like he was in control. "Forget it." Shaking his head, Ma Carlos felt helpless on his face. "Since both of them have passed your assessment, let's do what you said, make an exception and let Erza and Mira Jane both become S-class wizards." Carlos Ma also knew that the three people participating in the assessment actually had the ability to become S-class wizards. The assessment is just a formality, adding a test to the participants. Kana, for example, failed the test. An S-level wizard must not only have corresponding strength, but also have a calm mind and rational judgment when necessary. 2 months later, Erza and Mira Jane's injuries have also recovered. Ma Carlos also did what Luo Zhen promised, making the two of them S-class wizards. Khan on the side was a little lost, but we thought of Erza and Mira Jane being beaten like that by Luo Zhen's move. Kana was a little lucky. Can I really survive under that Luo Zhen's hands? Because they became S-class wizards at the same time, Erza and Mira Jane confronted each other as usual. However, the guild was much quieter, because Gray and Natsu went out to make commissions. Sitting at the bar drinking as usual, Luo Zhen felt that without the two of them in the guild, it would be quite boring. After clapping his hands, Luo Zhen stretched. After resting for so long, it's time to move around. Under the gaze of everyone, Luo Zhen walked up to the second floor. I looked in front of the entrustment board on the second floor. Eventually, a commission was chosen. Luo Zhen took off the entrustment form and came to Ma Carlos and handed the entrustment form to Ma Carlos for registration. After glancing at the commission, Carlos Ma's expression suddenly became serious. "This is a 10-year mission. Are you serious?" S-level commissions are divided into common missions, 10-year missions, and 100-year missions. You can hear it from the name. The difficulty of this commission is gradually increasing, and the 10-year mission is a commission that will take 10 years to complete. "President, I am very confident in myself." Luo Zhen grinned, patted his arm with his palm, and said with a smile. Hearing this, Carlos Ma didn't stop him. Luo Zhen's strength is obvious to all. Ever since he learned that Luo Zhen had awakened another magic that caused vibrations, Ma Karloff felt more at ease. With such strength, Luo Zhen is already a strong man at the front of the pyramid in this world. After registering the order form, Ma Carlos shouted at Luo Zhen's back, "When are you going to leave?" "Wait until Erza comes back. I still want to eat a meal made by Erza." Luo Zhen turned his head and said with a gentle smile on his face. Ma Karloff nodded and stopped asking. There is no mandatory requirement for when the 10-year task will be completed, and it would be best for Luo Zhen to leave after being fully prepared. Chapter 27. Beastmaster of the North. He must be there. On this day, under the watchful eye of Erza, Luo Zhen boarded the train to the Northland Plain. Looking worriedly at the leaving train, the worry in Erza's eyes seemed to overflow. "Don't worry, Erza. Luo Zhen's strength is very strong. He will not have any accidents by Erza's side. Graynat Sue and a reluctant Mira Jane were both seen off at the train station. Although Mira Jane's face was full of reluctance, there was still worry in her eyes. That guy won't have an accident because of a commission. He is the man I must beat. Seeing Erza's worried look, Mira Jane raised her head and spoke. Erza turned his head to look at Mira Jane, who held his head up with a smile on his face. Let's go back. Erza turned around and left the train station with his companions until the shadow of the train was no longer visible. After the train traveled for nearly 2 days, Luo Zhen finally arrived near the destination. Stretching for a while, Luo Zhen felt as if his bones were about to split in the car. Fortunately, there was still Zeus who could act as a cushion for a while. Otherwise, the hard seat would have almost not been sent away by Luo Zhen. Sitting is tiring. After getting off the train, Luo Zhen went straight to the city hall of this town. Not long after, the people in the city hall heard that Fairy Tale had an S-rank mage coming, and someone came out to greet him. Hello, I'm the mayor of Gir Tasta. In the conference room, an old man with pale hair but a resolute face walked in. When he saw Luo Zhen for the first time, a suspicion flashed in the mayor's eyes. Can such a young person become an S-class mage? It's not that no one has come to this commission before, but most of the visitors are older people. Here is my ID, and here is the order. Seeing the suspicion in the mayor's eyes, Luo Zhen took out the certificate given to him by Mr. Carlos, and the order this time from his bosom without hesitation. Seeing the proof, the mayor tentatively believed it. This commission has already replaced 6 S-level mages, and you are the 7th sitting on the chair, the mayor said with a lonely expression after drinking his saliva. Tell me the details of the entrustment. Luo Zhen frowned slightly and asked the mayor seriously. The mayor nodded and then told Luo Zhen about the details of the commission. After about half a quarter of an hour, Luo Zhen exhaled heavily. I roughly understand the content of the commission. In a mountain range near Gir Tasta, there is a Beastmaster. The Beast King has been invading the towns and villages near the mountains all the year round, and many people have died at the mouth of the Beast King. Several nearby villages and towns jointly issued a commission to the kingdom of Fiori, which was to eliminate this Beast King. But after a long time, this Beastmaster survived the pursuit of several S-level mages. And after a period of time, the strength became stronger and even killed these S-level mages afterwards. Now this commission has been upgraded repeatedly, and it has become a 10-year task. After understanding the whole story, Luo Zhen nodded, pointed to the towering mountain not far away, and asked, "The Beastmaster is there, right?" The mayor nodded and replied to Luo Zhen, "That's right there," with hatred in their eyes. The people in this town seem to be kept in captivity by that Beast King. It's not that they didn't think about leaving here, but they were all stopped by the Beast King. As if possessing wisdom, the Beast King raised humans in this town as food. Exhaling a foul breath, Luo Zhen nodded and said, "I see." Beckoning to Zeus, who was not far away, Luo Zhen jumped onto Zeus's back. He waved his hand at the figure of the mayor. "I'll go and see what's going on first." As Luo Zhen sat on Zeus's body and soared into the sky, the mayor's eyes were full of hope. Arriving in the mountains, Luo Zhen's knowledgeable and domineering aura is activated. In an instant, the scenes of the mountains came into Luo Zhen's mind. Flying around the mountains for a long time, Luo Zhen's knowledgeable domineering didn't even perceive the figure of the Beast King. Logically speaking, the Beastmaster should not be small in size. But in the mountains, Luo Zhen did detect many larger monsters, but they were all too weak. The figure of the Beast King did not appear from the beginning to the end. Luo Zhen couldn't help frowning. Could it be that the Beast King left? Shaking his head, Luo Zhen searched around the mountains twice more, but there was still no clue of the Beastmaster. Because the Beastmaster could not be found, Luo Zhen had no choice but to leave first. Back in town, Luo Zhen approached the mayor. In the hands of the mayor, he got the image of the Beast King. After telling that the Beastmaster didn't seem to be in the mountains, the mayor's mood suddenly became very excited. Emotionally retorted to Luo Zhen, "Impossible, that beast will never leave." Luo Zhen narrowed his eyes, opened his mouth, and asked the mayor, "What do you mean by what you just said? "What do you mean he can't leave?" The mayor came to his senses, and after calming down, a smile appeared on his old face. Said to Luo Zhen, "It's not interesting. That beast kept us here. He can't leave easily." Seeing that the mayor seemed to be hiding something, Luo Zhen pondered for a moment, then raised his head and said to the mayor, "If you have concealed the entrusted information, I can immediately give up the entrustment, and I can go back now." Being stared at by Luo Zhen's Huang, the mayor fell silent. Gritting his teeth, he replied in a low voice, "That beast appeared in that mountain range 9 years ago. When it appeared in the past, it ate a group of hunters who went hunting in the mountains, and then it ate people in the surrounding towns and villages. The animal appears regularly every time. It appears on August 1st every year, under the mayor's notice." Luo Zhen frowned slightly. August 1st is only half a month away from now. After a moment of silence, Luo Zhen nodded and said, "I will stay in the town and wait for half a month. If you think of anything else, I hope you can tell me right away." Luo Zhen's meaningful eyes glanced at the mayor, and being stared at by Luo Zhen, the mayor forced a smile on his face and said with an apologetic smile, "Of course." Chapter 28. Kill the Beastmaster. The beast tide is approaching. After staying in the town for a while, after the people in the town knew Luo Zhen's identity, they treated Luo Zhen very well. Strolling on the streets of the town, watching the friendly eyes of everyone on the street, Luo Zhen also smiled at everyone. Tomorrow will be what the mayor calls the 1st of August. Luo Zhen's expression was slightly serious. With the coming of night, Luo Zhen was lying on the bed with his arms behind his head, looking at the ceiling with calm eyes. As time passed, Luo Zhen closed his eyes and fell asleep in a short while. The next day was what the mayor called August 1st. Today, Luo Zhen got up early in the morning. Sitting on the body of Zeus, Luo Zhen went straight to the mountains. Zeus has been watching here in the mountains these days, but there was no movement of the Beast King at all. Not long after Luo Zhen arrived at the mountain range, Luo Zhen suddenly perceived the sudden appearance of a huge creature under the color of his knowledge. Luo Zhen's eyes were fixed, and he patted Zeus under him. Zeus understood and rushed in the direction Luo Zhen pointed. Just after Luo Zhen approached the mountain range, a roar that resounded through the sky echoed in the mountain range. The roar resounded through the sky, and the people in the town were frightened by the roar, and they all hid in their houses. In the city hall, the mayor looked hopefully at the mountain range not far away. In the distance, the huge monster appeared from the ground. The monster roaring up to the sky was full of fierceness. Its huge head suddenly turned around, and its huge eyes as big as lanterns suddenly stared at Luo Zhen. Roar! With fierce eyes full of violence, he let out a deafening roar at Luo Zhen. Frowning, a cold light flashed in Luo Zhen's eyes. Prometheus. Luo Zhen opened his mouth to drink softly, and then Prometheus rushed straight away with his body wrapped in intense heat. Fireball spewed out from Prometheus' mouth continuously and spewed towards the huge monster. The moment the fireball hit the Beastmaster's body, a violent explosion occurred. After the smoke and dust cleared, the Beast King was intact, without any injuries. Frowning, Luo Zhen couldn't help being a little surprised. He knew the strength of Prometheus best, and such an attack actually left the Beastmaster unscathed. "Zeus, you go too." Patting Zeus under him, Luo Zhen jumped off him, falling straight from the air. It crashed to the ground with a bang. After receiving the order, Zeus also rose into the sky, and together with Prometheus, he attacked the Beast King. Countless thunder and fireballs bombarded the huge body of the Beastmaster. Roar! Bang! 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 The attacks of Zeus and Prometheus continuously caused explosions on the Beastmaster's body. Although it was not painful, it still made the Beastmaster extremely furious. Grabbed a towering tree at the side and threw it straight to Zeus and the others in the air. Seeing that Zeus's attack had no effect, Luo Zhen was not going to sit still. His body flickered in the forest, and he approached the Beastmaster in a short while. The moment Luo Zhen's figure appeared, the Beast King also found Luo Zhen. He let out a deafening roar at Luo Zhen. The huge palm patted it straight. Looking at the huge palm slapped above his head, Luo Zhen stomped on the ground. The ground cracked, and spiderwebs of cracks spread. Luo Zhen's figure disappeared instantly. When it reappeared, Luo Zhen flashed to the front of the Beastmaster. Clenching his fist tightly, he punched the Beastmaster hard on the head. With Luo Zhen's punch, the Beast King's body crashed down. It fell straight to the ground. While the Beastmaster was knocked down with a punch, the power of the shaking fruit was attached to Luo Zhen's fist. Luo Zhen rushed forward, punching the Beastmaster one after another. The severe pain made the Beastmaster let out a deafening roar and waved his huge palm to knock Luo Zhen into the air. Possessing knowledgeable domineering aura, Luo Zhen easily dodged the Beastmaster's random attacks. Soon, the Beastmaster lost his movement under Luo Zhen's attack. Every punch has the ability to shake the fruit, completely shattering the internal organs of the Beast King. Looking at the Beastmaster who fell to the ground and lost his movement, Luo Zhen couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Logically speaking, the strength of this Beastmaster shouldn't make it difficult for S-level mages. Just when Luo Zhen was wondering, the whole mountain range suddenly began to tremble. The nearby forest suddenly began to shake and tremble, and all the trees on the ground were collapsing. Taking a closer look, countless monsters appeared underground. Roar! The moment these monsters crawled out of the ground, they raised their heads and roared into the sky. Luo Zhen's complexion sank. So much. These monsters that emerged from the ground looked exactly like the Beast King that was killed. This Beast King is actually a social creature. Luo Zhen jumped up from the ground and landed on Zeus. Looking at the entire mountain range filled with figures of monsters, Luo Zhen couldn't help being speechless. With a sullen face, Luo Zhen said to Zeus under him, "Go back to gear Tosta first." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Zeus turned his head and flew towards the town without hesitation. Not long after, Luo Zhen returned to the town and went straight to the city hall. Coming to the city hall, Luo Zhen found the mayor. He looked at the mayor with a sullen face. Why hide it? Seeing Luo Zhen's dark face, the mayor squeezed a smile on his face, pretending to be ignorant, and said, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean." Luo Zhen sneered, and then said, "I don't know. Then I'm leaving. You can handle the matter of the Beast King yourself." After speaking, Luo Zhen turned his head and was about to leave. Seeing the back of Luo Zhen about to walk out of the city hall, the mayor gritted his teeth and quickly shouted at Luo Zhen, "Wait. I tell you." The mayor's face was ugly, and he seemed to have aged 10 years. Under the mayor's remark, Luo Zhen's face became more and more gloomy. It turns out that these monsters have appeared here in the mountains for these years. The leaders of these monsters, that is, the real Beast Kings, are wise. The Beastmaster had no idea about these common people when the Beastmaster planned to slaughter all the nearby villages and towns. The mayor and the Beastmaster have reached a cooperation. Beastmaster spared these common people, but the mayor tried to find a way to send a magician with powerful magic power to the Beastmaster every year. Those S-class mages who came to crusade against the Beast King before all died at the hands of the monster because of the persecution of the mayor. He didn't even see the face of the Beastmaster. It's just that the mayor didn't expect that Luo Zhen's strength was so strong that after killing the monster, he completely made the Beast King furious. The Beast Horde was approaching, and the mayor had a bitter smile on his face. Maybe they shouldn't have cooperated with that Beast King in the first place. Chapter 29, Capture the Thief First. Kill the Beast King. After listening to the mayor's words, Luo Zhen suddenly fell silent. There was an ugly smile on the mayor's face, and he sat slumped on the chair as if he had aged 10 years. Have all those beasts recovered? After learning what happened in the mountains, the mayor was silent for a long time. His face became extremely ugly, and he muttered to himself, "It's over. Everything is over." He had seen these magical beasts forming a beast tide back then in a nearby Magister's guild. In order to resist that beast tide, everyone in the entire guild died in that beast tide. But after those mages were all sacrificed, the beast tide receded for some reason. Now, the mayor can only place his hope on Luo Zhen in front of him. The roar that resounded through the sky can still be heard in the ears. Luo Zhen pondered for a long time, lowered his eyes, and said to the mayor, "How many villages are there near the mountains?" Hearing Luo Zhen's words, the mayor quickly replied, "Because of the appearance of the Beast King, I have ordered people to relocate all the people from the nearby villages to the town. It happens every year." Luo Zhen nodded, then asked, "Is there any armed force in the town?" Hearing Luo Zhen's words, the mayor said with a wry smile, "We are just a small town, and there is no army stationed by the kingdom." Luo Zhen sighed. The deafening roar seemed to be getting closer. Luo Zhen was silent, walking towards the outside of the city hall without saying a word. On the wall of the small town, Luo Zhen stood there alone. Zeus, Prometheus, and Napoleon are floating beside each other in the air. Seeing the rushing beast tide, Zeus couldn't help but be speechless. "Master, do we really want to fight them?" Swallowing, Zeus asked Luo Zhen tremblingly. "You three, play freely." Luo Zhen glanced at Zeus and then jumped directly from the top of the city wall. Coming outside the city wall, a circle of light appeared on Luo Zhen's fist. A heavy punch hit the ground, accompanied by the vibration of the ground. A bottomless crack suddenly appeared on the ground in front of him, and the crack continued to grow until the ground was completely split. The crack in front of him continued to extend, and within a moment it turned into a bottomless abyss. Standing on the edge of the crack, Luo Zhen turned his head and shouted to Zeus and the others on the city wall, "Your purpose is to stop these beasts. Don't let them come from here. The beast tide is close at hand, and Zeus and the others on the city wall can already see the monsters at the forefront of the beast tide." After getting the order, Zeus and the others' eyes became firm. Looking at the smoke and dust rushing in the distance, countless monsters roared and charged towards the small town. Luo Zhen bent her legs slightly, and the ability to shake the fruit emerged on Luo Zhen's fist. A fierce punch hit the void beside him. The space shattered, and cracks continued to spread in the void beside Luo Zhen. In an instant, the group of galloping monsters in the distance suddenly stopped. Countless blood mist exploded, and the shrill screams echoed outside the town. With a leap, Luo Zhen stepped directly across the bottomless abyss in front of him. He rushed into the beast tide and waved his fists. Zeus and the others in the air didn't show any weakness either. They continuously sent down thunder and exploded in the beast horde. The sword lights surged, and Napoleon was flying in the beast tide, and the sharp sword light smashed the approaching monsters one after another. Luo Zhen stepped lightly, jumping among the beast tide. "Go straight to the mountains where the beast tide is coming. To capture the thief, capture the king first, and hand over the town to Zeus and the others for protection." Luo Zhen went straight to the Beastmaster. There are still countless monsters roaring in the mountains, constantly rushing towards the small town. Luo Zhen's complexion was slightly heavy, looking at the galloping herd. Running all the way, countless monsters have become the souls of Luo Zhen's subordinates. Suddenly, on the top of a mountain range in the distance, a huge beast is roaring upwards. There is a humanized light in the eyes of this monster. The moment Luo Zhen noticed him, the monster also noticed Luo Zhen for the first time. Seeing this huge monster, Luo Zhen's eyes froze. This should be the king of beasts. With a fierce step on the ground with both legs, the whole person soared into the sky. "Go straight to the Beastmaster." Roar. The moment Luo Zhen was about to approach the Beastmaster, a huge monster suddenly appeared in front of Luo Zhen, blocking Luo Zhen's way forward. "Go away." Luo Zhen let out an angry roar and swung his fist heavily to hit the Warcraft's chest. With a bang, the monster's chest exploded directly. Blood gushed out, soaking Luo Zhen's whole body in blood. The bloody Luo Zhen ran wildly in the forest. Soon came to the mountain of the Beast King. The Beastmaster turned around and stared at Luo Zhen with a pair of eyes full of wisdom. "You killed my descendants?" Suddenly, the Beastmaster spoke, and a heavy voice came out of his mouth. "It's me." Frowning, Luo Zhen was a little surprised that the Beast King could speak. Bury it with my descendants." A mouthful of breath spewed out from the mouth of the Beast King, and Luo Zhen, who was bathed in blood, was not afraid at all. Against the raging flames, he walked forward step by step. Breathing stopped. The Beastmaster looked at the unscathed Luo Zhen in horror. His eyes became extremely heavy. "I've never seen a human like you." The thick voice of the Beast King came, and there was a little awe in the voice. With a cold smile, Luo Zhen's eyes were filled with fierce killing intent. Instead of continuing to talk nonsense with the Beastmaster, Luo Zhen stomped on the ground. An afterimage flashed before Beastmaster's eyes. Rushing to the front of the Beastmaster, a circle of light appeared above his fist. A heavy punch hit the Beastmaster's head. With one hit, the Beastmaster's body was punched for a while. Suddenly, a mouthful of blood spewed out from the Beastmaster's mouth, with violence in his eyes. He raised his head and let out a roar towards the sky. Along with the Beast King's roar, the herds of beasts in the mountains also began to roar. "Go to hell." The Beastmaster roared, waved his huge palm, and patted Luo Zhen straight down. "Come." With a roar, Luo Zhen clenched his fists and went straight to the huge palm of the Beastmaster, accompanied by a bang. Luo Zhen couldn't help but took 2 steps back. The figure of the Beastmaster flew upside down and crashed heavily into the mountains behind him. Taking advantage of the victory and pursuing, Luo Zhen clenched his fists and rushed forward. Armed with the ability of the shaking fruit, his fists kept pounding on the Beastmaster's body. Luo Zhen himself didn't know how many punches he had thrown. Until the smoke cleared, a huge pothole appeared on the mountain. The body of the Beastmaster was in the center of the pit, already bloody from being beaten by Luo Zhen. Exhaling heavily, the Beast King in front of him had completely lost his vitality. The monsters at the foot of the mountain seemed to sense the passing of the Beastmaster, and suddenly became very restless, galloping towards the depths of the mountain. Chapter 30: The Beast Tide is over. The butterfly effect. Without the command of the Beast King, the Beast Tide quickly became restless and violent. They flocked to the depths of the mountains one after another, and the earth began to tremble. Luo Zhen turned his head and took a look at the bloody flesh, but he couldn't see the flesh that looked like a Beast King at all. Fists crossed in front of chest. As countless monsters poured into the mountains, Luo Zhen punched hard to the side. With the shaking of the mountain range, the mountain body began to crack, and the ground also began to crack with violent tremors. The monsters roared, but they were helpless in front of the huge rubble and fell into the cracks one after another. Huge boulders fell, crushing countless monsters to death, and the monsters that couldn't stop also fell into the abyss one after another. In front of the city wall, Zeus and the others breathed a sigh of relief as they watched the beast tide that turned around and rushed towards the mountains. Even though the bottomless abyss intercepted the beast horde, it still almost made the beast horde break through to the town. It should be something the master did to make all these monsters rush towards the mountains. Looking at the backs of the monsters fleeing in a panic, Prometheus said with solemn eyes, floating beside Zeus, "Then let's hurry to support the master." Hearing what Prometheus said, Zeus, who was covered in thunder and lightning, shouted. Looking at each other, Zeus, Prometheus, and Napoleon flew towards the mountains. Flying all the way, I saw countless monster corpses. Zeus and the others couldn't help being startled. Until in the depths of the mountains, Luo Zhen was seen crazily slaughtering in the wave of monsters, waving his fist to shake and kill the surrounding monsters. Fire from the sky. Prometheus spit out countless fireballs, and they spewed out towards the beast tide that was rushing towards Luo Zhen on the ground. Falling into the beast tide, the fireball exploded instantly, and the sound of constant explosions echoed in the mountains. Shocule. Zeus was not to be outdone. The thunder and lightning in the sky danced wildly, turning into ferocious thunder snakes and blasting towards the ground. Luo Zhen, who was in the beast tide, looked up and noticed Zeus and the others in the sky. With a sharp step on the ground, the whole person jumped up. It fell directly on Zeus. "Master, are you okay?" Zeus, who was covered in thunder and lightning, saw Luo Zhen and hurriedly asked Luo Zhen. The reason is that the appearance of Luo Zhen is too scary now. His whole body was bathed in blood, and the strong smell of blood on his body scared Zeus and the others. Luo Zhen shook his head and didn't answer. Looking at the endless tide of beasts under his feet, Luo Zhen finally understood why this was a 10-year mission. With this level of beast hordes, ordinary S-level mages would have been trampled to death in the beast horde. A circle of light appeared on Luo Zhen's fist, and he punched hard into the air around him. Space shattered and mountains began to crumble. Countless monsters were buried under the rubble of the mountain. In this blow, Luo Zhen used all his strength, and the mountain range was completely shattered. The earthquake covered the entire mountain range, and violent tremors could be felt in towns. Houses collapsed, and many people were buried by houses. Some monsters were not buried by the rubble, and they were already shaken to death the moment the earthquake struck. The entire mountain range is full of blood and corpses of monsters. A strong smell of blood wafts through the dilapidated mountains. This blow directly killed the warcraft in the mountains in one blow. He exhaled heavily and shook off the dry blood. Luo Zhen felt sticky and uncomfortable. Under the knowledgeable and domineering perception, there are almost no living things in the mountains. Most of the monsters buried deep in the mountains were seriously injured. To be on the safe side, Luo Zhen smashed into the air with another blow. There was another violent tremor, and the mountain range seemed to be pulsating, constantly undulating. Luo Zhen sat down on Zeus's body, and the continuous fighting made Luo Zhen feel a little exhausted. Let's go back. Exhaling a foul breath, Luo Zhen patted Zeus's body and said, "Okay, master." Hearing Luo Zhen's order, Zeus turned his head and flew in the direction of Girtasta. In the town, many houses were knocked down. Many people suffered injuries of varying degrees, but fortunately no one died. Back in the town, Luo Zhen found the mayor who was condolences to the residents. Seeing Luo Zhen drenched in blood, the mayor was also startled at first. But after hearing that Luo Zhen solved the beast tide and the beast king was killed, he could not help kneeling in front of Luo Zhen and weeping bitterly. The aftermath of the aftermath was handed over to the mayor, and Luo Zhen returned to the place where he lived. Fortunately, the hotel didn't collapse due to the shock just now. Luo Zhen went back to the room and took a shower to wash away the sticky blood behind him. After all matters were dealt with, Luo Zhen also set out on his way home. Sitting on Zeus' body and flying towards a train station in the city, Luo Zhen put his hands behind his head. After a while, Luo Zhen fell asleep on Zeus' body. In order for Luo Zhen to have a good sleep, Zeus slowed down drastically. 2 days later, Luo Zhen returned to Magnolia. After getting off the train, Luo Zhen exhaled heavily, twisted his body, and walked towards Fairy Tale. Strolling in Magnolia, the residents of Magnolia saw Luo Zhen and showed friendly smiles to Luo Zhen. "Hey, brother Luo Zhen." Walking down the street, suddenly a familiar voice came from behind. Luo Zhen turned his head and looked. Li Sena and Mira Jane were behind him. Luo Zhen turned around and waved to Li Sena with a smile on his face. "Yo, it's Li Sena. Where are you going?" "Sister Mira is going to take us out as a commission, but Alfman's big brother hasn't come yet." Li Sena stuck out her tongue and quickly ran to Luo Zhen's side. Although Luo Zhen severely injured Mira Jane in the wizard assessment, Li Sena did not resent Luo Zhen because of this. "A commission?" Luo Zhen frowned and curiously asked Mira Jane, who was silent at the side. "What commission? Is it dangerous?" Mira Jane stared, raised her head proudly, and said to Luo Zhen, "What does it have to do with you? I'm already an S-level mage, and I can handle any danger myself." Seeing Mira Jane's arrogant look, Luo Zhen rolled his eyes and then looked at Li Sena. Li Sena smiled and said to Luo Zhen with a smile, "It's a commission to hunt down bandits, but it's not an S-level commission. Sister Mira wants to let Alfman's big brother practice his skills." Hearing this, Luo Zhen felt relieved. Luo Zhen was worried that because of his appearance, Mira Jane became an S-level mage ahead of time, and then went ahead to do the commission to crusade against the Beastmaster. Chapter 31, The Plot Begins. King of Souls. Ouch. Let me get out of the car. I don't want to take the car. Let me run there. On the train, a boy with pink hair had an ugly face, holding a vomit bag in his hand, and vomited continuously. Miss Erza, what's wrong with Natsu? It doesn't matter to him. A blonde girl on the side looked worried, watching Natsu lying on the chair with a livid face. Don't worry about him. He's always been like this. Erza at the side glanced at Natsu, raised his arm under Lucy's horrified eyes, and punched Natsu heavily on the head. Miss Erza, what are you doing? Lucy looked at the scene in front of her in horror and quickly curled up in a corner. Terrible. Thank you. Erza punched Natsu on the head, and Natsu suddenly felt his eyes go dark and fell straight on the chair and fell asleep. Before passing out, Natsu struggled to get a word out of his mouth. Very scary. Lucy curled up, roaring inwardly. Although he knew Natsu's weakness under the explanation of Happy and Gray, he still looked at Erza with awe, as expected of the fairy queen. Just call me Erza. We will be companions from now on. Listening to the honorific title in Lucy's mouth, Erza showed a smile on his face and said to Erza with a smile. On a chair not far away, a young man's eyes flickered with scorn, watching Erza and the others fight around, with a look of disdain on the corner of his mouth. At this time, a loud noise reached everyone's ears. Erza and Gray frowned, feeling that the voice was somewhat familiar. Happy suddenly flapped its wings and flew up, flying straight towards the direction of the voice. Erza, Gray, look who I found. Not long after, Happy came back waving her wings, excitedly pointing at a figure not far away and shouting. Looking in the direction Happy pointed, a familiar figure was sitting there. Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen, when did you come back? Gray and Erza immediately stood up, looking at the figure with surprise and joy on their faces. Hey, why are you here? Raising his head, he glanced impatiently at the noisy Prometheus and Zeus, and Luo Zhen looked at Erza and Gray in surprise. Luo Zhen, when did you come back? Erza trotted all the way to Luo Zhen's face and hugged Luo Zhen's neck. I just came back from a commission, and I'm about to go back to the guild. With a smile on Luo Zhen's face, he reached out and hugged Erza in front of him. Looking at the scene in front of her, Lucy was full of surprise. What's the relationship between Miss Erza and that gentleman? Lucy looked at the scene in front of her in surprise and couldn't imagine that Erza in front of her was the same person as Erza who punched Natsu unconscious just now. Hey, don't you know, Erza and Luo Zhen are a couple. Hearing Lucy's words, Happy looked at Lucy with a face full of shock, as if she had heard something terrible. I just joined Fairy Tale. How could I know? Lucy's face darkened, and she yelled at Happy with black lines all over her head. Really, I told you kindly, you still speak so loudly to them. Happy was full of grievances and said aggrievely while hiding behind Gray. That's right, Lucy. It's your fault, Gray nodded, helping Happy scold Lucy. With a face full of helplessness, Lucy immediately looked at Luo Zhen. Is Mr. Luo Zhen also a member of our guild? Isn't he also very strong? Seeing the shy look on Erza's face, Lucy asked Happy and Gray excitedly. Luo Zhen is super strong. He is one of the candidates for the president of our guild. Gray crossed his arms and took off his clothes at some point. Chairman candidate? Lucy's face was full of surprise, and she didn't notice that Gray took off all her clothes for a moment. She didn't expect that young man, who looked about his age, to be so strong. Erza took Luo Zhen back to his position. Yo, Gray, Happy, long time no see. With a smile on his face, Luo Zhen raised his hand to greet Gray and the others. Luo Zhen, long time no see. With a smile on his face, Gray waved at Luo Zhen. Happy flapped her wings and fell into Luo Zhen's arms. Gray, get your clothes on, boy. Looking at Gray, who was stripped of only his underwear, Luo Zhen shouted at him after a moment of silence. Hey, when? Luo Zhen, what are you going to do? Pushing Natsu to the corner, Gray sat next to Natsu in disgust, making way for Luo Zhen and Erza. I just completed the commission and am preparing to return to the guild. In recent years, Luo Zhen has rarely done general S-level commissions, and most of the missions he received were 10-year missions. Because it's been a long time since she left this time, Luo Zhen still misses the days in Magnolia. After hearing Luo Zhen's words, Gray, Erza, and the others looked at each other and fell silent. What happened to you guys? Looking at the silent 3 people and 1 cat, Luo Zhen asked with some doubts. Luo Zhen, this is the train leaving Magnolia. With a heavy complexion, Erza raised his head, looked straight into Luo Zhen's eyes, and said, What? I sat wrong again. The expression on Luo Zhen's face suddenly froze, and he was stunned. Why do you want to add a word? As soon as Luo Zhen's words came out of his mouth, the blonde girl Lucy couldn't help complaining. Who is this? Hearing Lucy's voice, Luo Zhen turned his head to look at Lucy and asked Erza. She's a partner who just joined our guild, Lucy. He is one of the strongest candidates in our guild, Luo Zhen. Hearing what Lucy said, Erza pointed to Lucy, who was sitting on his left, and introduced. Hello, I know you. Suddenly, Lucy seemed to think of Luo Zhen's name, like stars bursting out of her eyes, and said to Luo Zhen excitedly, You know each other? Seeing Lucy excited, Erza looked at Lucy suspiciously. Do not know. Seeing Erza's eyes, Luo Zhen quickly shook his head in denial. I saw the name of Mr. Luo Zhen in the newspaper. Fairy tale, Soul King Luo Zhen. Lucy is like a little girl, looking at Lucy with excited eyes. Luo Zhen's face darkened, and he said with black lines all over his face, Stop calling me by that name. Chapter 32, You are all veteran actors now. Seeing Luo Zhen's dark face, Lucy was at a loss for a while. Vomit. Suddenly, Natsu, who was beside Gray, suddenly vomited, interrupting the conversation. Gray jumped straight from the chair, looking at the vomit on his body, feeling nauseous. Damn it. You motion sickness, BD. Punching on the head of Natsu, who passed out. Gray took off his upper body clothes in disgust. Natsu is still the same. Seeing this scene, Luo Zhen couldn't help laughing. Are you going to do a commission? Closer to home. Luo Zhen looked at Erza curiously and asked. That's right. You just come to help. Hearing Lucy's inquiry, Erza's eyes lit up immediately, and he told Luo Zhen the ins and outs of the matter. But for a moment, the figures of Zeus and Prometheus appeared in front of everyone. With Luo Zhen here, Eisenwald's problem can be easily solved. Gray pushed Natsu to the corner in disgust, looked at Luo Zhen with bright eyes and said, Don't. I won't participate in your commission. Luo Zhen grinned and leaned lazily on the chair. The expression on Gray's face suddenly froze, and he looked at Luo Zhen resentfully. Luo Zhen, Eisenwald, and the others want to summon the demon Lullaby. I hope you can help. Erza's face was full of sincerity, and he looked at Luo Zhen seriously and said, Seeing Erza's sincere and innocent eyes, Luo Zhen spread his hands and snapped his fingers. But for a moment, the figures of Zeus and Prometheus galloped over, appearing in everyone's sight. Prometheus, you follow Erza and the others. Then I went alone to the place where the president and the others had their regular meeting. After arranging Zeus and Prometheus to Erza's side, Luo Zhen patted his body and stood up. Suddenly, Luo Zhen stopped in his tracks. He looked at a chair not far from the carriage. With a smile on his face, he walked slowly in front of a person whose face was completely covered by a black robe. Patting him on the shoulder, Luo Zhen grinned and said, Have you seen enough? Luo Zhen's sudden attack startled the man. He quickly raised his head, looked at Luo Zhen's smiling eyes, and pretended to be nonchalant. What are you talking about? It's okay if you don't understand. Luo Zhen stared at this man with a smile and stretched out his palm towards his neck. Luo Zhen moved very slowly. But this man wanted to avoid Luo Zhen's arm, but he seemed to be controlled, watching Luo Zhen's palm grabbing his neck. He pinched the man's neck and lifted him up directly. A suffocating fear suddenly surged into his heart. The man struggled continuously. His face turned red. Seeing this scene, Erza and others rushed forward. Luo Zhen, what are you doing? Erza quickly came to Luo Zhen's side, watched Luo Zhen strangling the man's neck, and hurriedly asked Luo Zhen, glancing at the man who was already flushed and about to die from suffocation at any moment. Luo Zhen swung his arm vigorously and threw the man out, slamming heavily on the carriage. Luo Zhen said to Erza, "He is the member of Eisenwald you have been looking for." "What? How do you know?" Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Gray and Erza looked surprised. After Zeus revealed the coat of arms on the man's body, everyone believed Luo Zhen's words. "Look quickly, is Lullaby on him?" At this time, Erza suddenly regained his composure and shouted at Gray. Gray nodded and quickly came to the man, rummaging through him. However, after searching for a long time, the existence of the flute was not found on the man. The man sneered and said to Erza and the others, "Lullaby is in the hands of the president. You just wait for your president to be cursed and die." The man stared at Luo Zhen with resentment in his eyes. "Flies a fairy tale. You just wait to be completely sucked out of your soul and die under Lullaby's curse." The man laughed, looked at Luo Zhen resentfully, and roared, "It's so noisy." Before Luo Zhen could speak, Zeus suddenly let out a roar. Thunder surged on his body, and a burst of thunder spewed out from Zeus's body, directly penetrating the man's body. The man's body shook, and he glanced at Zeus, who was covered in thunder, in disbelief, and closed his eyes completely, unwillingly. Luo Zhen, hurry to the president. The president is in danger. With a heavy complexion, Erza quickly shouted at Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen nodded and didn't refuse this time either. "Zeus, let's go." Jumping up and jumping onto Zeus, he rushed out of the carriage in the blink of an eye and disappeared from everyone's sight. Luo Zhen, who was sitting cross-legged on Zeus, had a calm expression, not worried about Mr. Carlo at all. In the original book, the demon Lullaby, which Erza and the others can easily deal with, can threaten the safety of the stable Carlo. Zeus galloped all the way and soon arrived at the place where the chairman held a regular meeting. Seeing a group of uncles sitting there drinking afternoon tea, Luo Zhen sighed. He really didn't want to deal with these uncles. Jumping off Zeus' back, Luo Zhen put his hands in his pockets and walked towards the horseman Carlo. Hearing the movement behind him, the presidents all cast their gazes at Luo Zhen. "Luo Zhen, why are you here?" Looking at the sudden appearance of Luo Zhen, the groom Karloff was suddenly surprised, informed Mr. Carlo of the matter in detail, and Luo Zhen sat beside him and began to feast on it. "I'm so tired from the journey, so it's not too much to eat." After learning what happened, Carlos Mott didn't worry at all and even asked Luo Zhen to stay here and take care of it when necessary. Looking at these old actors, Luo Zhen couldn't help sighing. "Long time no see, everyone." Luo Zhen smiled, waved and smiled at several presidents present. Luo Zhen was also very familiar with these people, several presidents of the Guangming Guild. He and Luo Zhen are also old acquaintances. Just as Luo Zhen was feasting, a violent hurricane suddenly hit. A man with a scythe in his hand and a mad look on his face appeared in midair. Looking at the top figures of the bright guild below, the eyes of the man holding the sickle became even crazier. He took out a black flute from his pocket, and the top of the flute looked like a skull. The man looked crazy and muttered to himself, "You old men, be devoured by Zerif's demons." Chapter 33: Devour Lullaby. The man's eyes were full of madness, and the black flute was surrounded by black air, and dark magic power emerged from the flute. The moment he appeared, Luo Zhen spotted him. He raised his head and glanced at the horseman beside him, and found that the horseman was looking up at the sky. Knowing that Carlos the horseman had spotted Aragorn, Luo Zhen stopped worrying and lowered his head to process the food in front of him. Ma Karloff lowered his head and glanced at Luo Zhen, who was feasting beside him, and was speechless for a while. He elbowed Luo Zhen and whispered to Luo Zhen, "Take care of it." Luo Zhen raised his head in a daze, and seeing Mrs. Carlo's serious expression, Luo Zhen said helplessly, "President, you can solve this trivial matter by yourself. You brat, don't you know how to respect the old and love the young?" Ma Carlos was out of breath and shouted loudly at Luo Zhen. Ma Karloff suddenly shouted loudly, attracting the attention of many presidents around him. Seeing everyone's mocking gazes, Carlos the horse wanted to find a crack and slip in. Okay, the old man is in trouble. Karloff stared at Luo Zhen without saying a word. Luo Zhen clapped his hands helplessly, slapping away the food residue on his palms. Standing up, he looked at Aragorn in the sky, who was still chanting while waving a scythe. Boom! Luo Zhen's feet exploded suddenly, and his whole body shot straight into the sky. A burst of explosion sounded in his ears, and Aragorn's expression changed. Suddenly, a smiling face appeared in front of Aragorn's eyes. "Who are you?" A look of horror flashed in his eyes, and he quickly distanced himself from the man in front of him. "Can you give me that thing in your hand?" Without answering Aragorn's question, Luo Zhen looked at him with a smile and pointed to the lullaby on his hand. Aragorn looked alert and looked at Luo Zhen solemnly, suddenly appearing in front of him without making a sound. This person's strength is much stronger than his own. As soon as he gritted his teeth, he raised the lullaby in his hand and was ready to play. The next moment, he suddenly felt as if his chest had been hit hard and a mouthful of blood spewed out of his mouth. "If you don't give it, you won't give it. Why are you ready to do it if you don't agree with each other?" A smiling face appeared before Aragorn's eyes again. Luo Zhen grabbed Aragorn's neck with one hand and took lullaby from his hand. The moment Luo Zhen took lullaby, a burst of black air kept gushing out of it. Luo Zhen's complexion changed, and he threw the lullaby out of his hand. Black air emerged, and a huge figure condensed in the black air. Roar! The huge figure condensed in the black air, let out a roar, and looked greedily at the people around. Seeing this scene, madness appeared in Aragorn's sluggish eyes, and bursts of wild laughter came out of his mouth. "Ha! You will all die under Zirif's curse. Lullaby, devour their souls." Aragorn laughed wildly, looking at the huge body frantically. Suddenly, Lullaby turned his eyes and stared straight at Zeus at Luo Zhen's feet. What a pure soul! His eyes were filled with greed, and he stared straight at the figure of Zeus. Luo Zhen frowned and punched Aragorn on the head. The wild laughter stopped abruptly. Aragorn rolled his eyes and passed out immediately. Throwing him to the ground, Luo Zhen sat cross-legged on Zeus's body, staring straight at Lullaby. Suddenly, Lullaby's eyes fell on Luo Zhen, who was sitting on Zeus, and his eyes froze for a moment. The greed in the eyes became more and more crazy. In Luo Zhen's body, he could perceive a stronger soul power. "Give me your soul, humble human being." Lullaby looked at Luo Zhen eagerly. The hoarse voice came out of his mouth, and he looked at Luo Zhen proudly and said. Hearing Lullaby's words, Luo Zhen looked puzzled. "Why do you look so weak now? It's a cat or a dog who wants to come up and step on him." A violent breath erupted from Luo Zhen's body. Overlord Color Domineering launched. Lullaby suddenly felt a violent breath coming towards him to suppress him, as if he wanted to crush himself. Empty shock. Luo Zhen stepped on Zeus's body fiercely and rushed out with a bang. He clenched his fist tightly. A circle of light appeared above his fist, and he punched heavily on Lullaby's body. In an instant, the body condensed with black energy was almost defeated. Under the terrifying aura, Lullaby suddenly felt Luo Zhen's emotionless pupils staring at him. The next moment, Lullaby felt as if something had been pulled out of his body. "No!" A shrill scream came out of his mouth, and his soul was pulled away above the flute that was continuously gushing black air from the ground. Lullaby's huge body disappeared instantly, and a trace of pure white soul was caught in Luo Zhen's hands. Is this the demon Zirif created? Holding Lullaby's soul in his hands, Luo Zhen had a playful look on his lips. Lullaby, who was caught in his hands, was still struggling, trying to escape Luo Zhen's palm. The next moment, Luo Zhen's soul fruit ability was activated, directly erasing Lullaby's intelligence. Only a trace of pure soul is left in the palm of Luo Zhen. Zeus! Throwing the soul into the air, the figure of Zeus galloped over, swallowing the soul in one gulp. "Thank you, Master." With gratitude in his eyes, Zeus felt that the power of the soul in his body increased a lot in an instant. Falling to the ground, Luo Zhen crushed Lullaby's flute with one kick. Just after everything was settled, there was a sound of magic vehicles in the distance. Looking in the direction of the sound, I saw a magic four-wheeled vehicle galloping in the distance. When he arrived at the place, Erza's complexion was a little pale, and Erza jumped out of the car and ran towards Luo Zhen. Looking at the pale Erza, Luo Zhen quickly stepped forward to support Erza's body. An anxious look appeared on his face, and Erza quickly asked Luo Zhen, "How's the situation? What about the president?" Luo Zhen frowned slightly, and instead of answering Erza's words, he asked Erza, "What's wrong with you? Where did you get hurt?" Chapter 34, Butterfly Wings. Natsu versus Erza. What's wrong with you? Where are you hurt? Seeing Erza's pale face, Luo Zhen frowned and came to Erza to ask. Erza shook his head and said weakly, "I'm fine. It's just that the magic power is consumed too much." Luo Zhen heaved a sigh of relief and yelled at Erza with a serious face, "Aren't you relieved that I'm here?" Hearing Luo Zhen's scolding, Erza's eyes flashed with a smile. Then he got serious and asked Luo Zhen, "Where's Ergor? Where did Lullaby go?" Hearing Erza's words, Luo Zhen pouted toward a pile of ashes not far away. "Is this Lullaby?" Looking at the ashes on the ground, Erza's face was covered with black lines, and there seemed to be several question marks floating on his head. "Lullaby's body has been destroyed," Luo Zhen shrugged. He didn't expect Lullaby's body to be so fragile. Just a light kick and it shattered directly, and then it became a residue. "That's good." Seeing that nothing happened, Erza breathed a sigh of relief and collapsed on Luo Zhen's body weakly. Luo Zhen supported Erza to find a place to sit down, and a magic circle condensed in Luo Zhen's palm. Not long after, Erza suddenly felt that the magic power in his body was constantly filling. Looking at this scene in surprise, Erza raised his head and glanced at Luo Zhen, asking, "What is this?" Luo Zhen grinned and said, "A new gadget that can transfer the magic power in my body to other people's body." As the magic power in Erza's body was replenished, his pale face became rosy. Because of the appearance of Lullaby, the regular meeting of Makarlov and others had to be temporarily suspended. Everyone set foot on the way home. Because of the appearance of Luo Zhen, everyone did not encounter the small town in the original book. Back in the guild, everyone smiled when they saw the long-lost Luo Zhen. "Welcome Luo Zhen home." "Long time no see, Luo Zhen." "Brother Luo Zhen, long time no see. I miss you so much." A figure suddenly fell into Luo Zhen's arms, hugging Luo Zhen's neck tightly. Reached out and patted the figure's back. Luo Zhen smiled and said, "Okay, come down quickly." This figure is none other than Mirajane's sister, Lisana. Because of the existence of Luo Zhen, Lisana was not sucked into AI Delis like in the original book. Not far away, a woman with very gentle brows looked at this scene, and there was a gloomy look in her eyes. Mirajane, long time no see. She looks pretty again. Looking at the people present, Luo Zhen saw Mirajane in the crowd at a glance, smiled, and said to her with a chuckle. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Mirajane covered her mouth and smiled lightly, like a flower blooming. "You too. You've become handsome too." Mirajane's gentle eyes are full of Luo Zhen's figure, and the blurred eyes just fall on Luo Zhen's body. But when he saw Lisana beside Luo Zhen, his eyes suddenly became dull. In my mind, I recalled the original commission to crusade against the Beastmaster. On the way out, I ran into Luo Zhen. At that time, Luo Zhen seemed to know something. Regardless of Mirajane's refusal, he must follow the three of them. Mirajane couldn't resist Luo Zhen, so he had to let him follow. Although all the way down, Luo Zhen has never made a move. During the crusade against the Beastmaster, Mirajane thought he could trap the Beastmaster and then let Alfman take over the Beastmaster. But when Alfman took over the Beastmaster, he suddenly fell into a runaway. The powerful force sent Mirajane flying, just when Mirajane's life was hanging by a thread. Lisana fell in front of Mirajane, trying to get Mirajane to block Alfman's attack. But Lisana's gentle words still echoed in Mirajane's ears. Just when Mirajane was desperate, Luo Zhen, whom Mira Jane had already forgotten, shot. Knockout Elfman who has accepted the Beastmaster. And after that time, Mira Jane seemed to be a different person. She is no longer the little girl she used to be, but has become gentle and pleasant. But after that, Mira Jane also lost her magic power and became a common person completely. Because of the state of mind, I can only wait for Mira Jane to enlighten himself and then come out. Mira Jane then became a waiter at Fairy Tale. Just after returning to the guild, Natsu, who was sober, immediately became full of vitality. His eyes scanned the members of the guild. It suddenly fell on Erza's body. His eyes were full of fighting spirit, and he shouted excitedly at Erza, "Erza, come and fight me. You promised me. Bring it on." Erza didn't refuse, looking at Natsu with folded arms. "Up, Erza!" There was a fierce fighting intent in his eyes, and flames burst from his fists. "Natsu, come on." Not far away, Happy was waving his small arms to cheer for Natsu, and turned his head to bet among the crowd in the guild. Erza wins. He is not ignorant of Natsu's strength. How could it be that Erza's opponent? Witnessing everything that Happy bet with her own eyes, Lucy couldn't help complaining. "Hey, can you really cheer for Natsu? Is Lucy an idiot? How could Natsu be that Erza's opponent?" Hearing Lucy's complaints, Happy waved her little wings, glanced at Lucy with wise eyes, and said, "Makes sense." Thinking of that terrifying Erza, Lucy immediately supported his forehead. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't beat Erza. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. Natsu is fighting high, completely unaware that he's been sold by Happy. Hot flames poured out of the fist and rushed towards Erza with the fist waving. Change into Yendi's armor. Seeing Natsu attacking towards him, Erza didn't care in the slightest. Immediately replaced with the Yin Emperor's armor with magic, which can enhance immunity to flames. With a burst of white light flashing, the armor on his body turned into scarlet. Red's long hair was tied into twin ponytails, holding a long sword and pointing at Natsu. Flame surged on a long sword and swung towards Natsu. The turbulent flame turned into a slash and went straight to Natsu. Boom! The collision of flames and flames instantly made a huge roar. The resulting heat wave couldn't help but make the surrounding Fairy Tale members take 2 steps back. So strong. Chapter 35, that's it. You complain about his appearance. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. The collision of the 2 flames made a violent explosion. The resulting heat wave shocked everyone in the guild back 2 steps. Seeing Erza and Natsu fighting fiercely in the field, Lucy's eyes were full of wonder, and she couldn't help exclaiming, "So strong." Hearing Lucy's exclamation, Happy folded her arms proudly, looked at Erza in the field, and said, "Of course. Erza is an S-rank mage from Fairy Tale. Shouldn't you be proud of Natsu?" Hearing Happy's words, Lucy complained with black lines all over her face. "Natsu can't be Erza's opponent. He has lost many times." Happy waved the kitten's paw indifferently and said with a look that I had known for a long time. The sharp blade flew. Erza's scarlet figure galloped across the field and instantly rushed towards Natsu, whose fists were burning with flames. Seeing Erza rushing in front of him, Natsu looked extremely excited. Fire Dragon's Wing Strike. Arms pulled back, flames spread across Natsu's arms. With the waving of his arms, he slammed heavily towards Erza's body. "Don't underestimate me." Natsu. Erza's face was flat, and he watched the scene in front of him seriously in his eyes. The next moment, the long sword in his hand instantly ignited raging flames and directly slashed at Natsu's arm. The flames attached to the slash, as if Yen Mo was roaring. The flaming sword energy rushed towards the sky and collided with Natsu's arms in an instant. With a muffled sound, Natsu's body was knocked flying. "Come again." After landing, Natsu turned over like a kite, without the slightest discouragement on his face, looking excitedly at Erza not far away. Taking a deep breath, a surge of magic power accumulated in Natsu's mouth. Fire Dragon's roar. The magic power condensed, and Natsu let out a burst of breath. Raging flames gushed out of Natsu's mouth, heading straight for Erza. The sword of Emperor Yin, Erza remained motionless, standing on the spot with both hands holding the long sword. At the moment when the flame was close at hand, he cut the long sword towards his body. The turbulent pillar of fire was instantly split into two in front of Erza. Damn it! Natsu gritted his teeth, looking at the unmoving Erza with some dissatisfaction. That's it. At this moment, an untimely voice suddenly sounded behind everyone. Everyone turned their heads away, only to see a frog standing not far away, proudly looking up at everyone present. I am the envoy of the Magic Council, here to announce the order of the council. Seeing everyone's frowning, the frog was a little dissatisfied and took out a piece of paper from his pocket. The envoy of the Senate? What is he doing here? What are the members of the Senate coming to our guild for? Hey, why don't you complain about his appearance? Seeing this frog, everyone in the guild seemed to have no accidents. Lucy, who saw this frog for the first time, complained in horror. Just as he was about to read it out, a terrifying coercion suddenly crushed him. The frog's legs became weak for a while, and he fell to his knees on the ground with a plop. The whole body was covered in cold sweat, and the frog's eyes were full of fear. Erza, Natsu, you carry on. Glancing at the frog that was crushed to the ground by the terrifying coercion, Luo Zhen turned his head and continued talking to Erza, and Erza with a smile on his face. Looking at Luo Zhen, Erza nodded. Erza, I'm on. Natsu's fists collided, and the flames blazed through the collision. The next moment, Natsu rushed in front of Erza, raised his fist, and punched Erza's cheek. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. At the moment when the fist was about to hit Erza's cheek, Erza twisted slightly, and an afterimage appeared in front of Natsu's eyes. The next moment, Erza's figure appeared beside Natsu. Raising his fist high, he punched Natsu on the head. Boom! With a loud noise, Natsu's body was smashed to the ground heavily. A big bag bulged on his head, and a puff of blue smoke floated on the big bag on his head. Hey! Natsu lost again. The 1,214th challenge failed. Ha ha! As expected, Natsu lost again. Erza is really strong. Natsu sucks. Natsu was knocked down, and everyone in the guild burst into laughter. After Natsu was knocked out, Happy appeared with waving little wings to announce the result. Hey, it's all like this, so there's no need to announce so loudly. Lucy's head was full of black lines. She looked at Natsu, who was knocked to the ground, and then at Happy, who was happy to get the dried fish. After knocking Natsu down, Erza's body flashed white and restored the previous armor. Arriving in front of Luo Zhen, he glanced at the trembling frog that was crushed to the ground not far away, and said worriedly, "Nothing will happen, right? He's a member of the Magic Council after all." Reaching out and rubbing Erza Fey Red's hair, Luo Zhen grinned and said, "Don't worry, nothing will happen." Walking in front of the frogman with his hands in his pockets, Luo Zhen crouched in front of him with a smile on his face. After the terrifying coercion dissipated, the frogman raised his head with difficulty, trembling all over, trying to stand up. Suddenly, he raised his head and saw the familiar face in front of him. The frogman was furious and was about to reprimand him. Suddenly, the smiling face in front of him felt a little familiar. Lo, Master Luo Zhen. After watching for a while, the frogman suddenly remembered the identity of the person in front of him and stood up in a cold sweat. The whole body is shaking constantly. Oh, arrest warrant. Luo Zhen didn't respond to the frog's words and picked up a piece of brown paper from in front of him. Open it and see that it is an arrest warrant issued by the Senate. Arrest Erza? What? Luo Zhen threw the craft paper above his head, and Prometheus swallowed it in one gulp, and a puff of blue smoke spit out from Prometheus' mouth. Looking at the frog in front of him with a smile, Luo Zhen asked softly in a very gentle voice. Erza Yucaret wrecked Magnolia's train, causing massive damage at the railway station. Members of the Senate issued a warrant for Erza Yucaret's arrest. The frog's body was trembling, and it lowered its head, not daring to look at Luo Zhen. After listening to the frog's words, Luo Zhen's expression was very calm, and the smiling expression on his face remained unchanged. Whose order? Luo Zhen's gentle voice then reached his ears, and the frog quickly said, "Orders from members of parliament." Cold sweat continued to flow down his forehead, and the clothes on his body were already soaked in cold sweat. The person in front of him was too scary, otherwise he wouldn't have let the frog show such a look. Chapter 36. Do you think you're qualified to joke with me? Reached out and patted the frog on the shoulder. Luo Zhen nodded and said, "No problem." As he spoke, he turned his head and shouted to Erza behind him, "Erza, the counselors are going to arrest you and put you in jail." After Luo Zhen's words fell, everyone in the field didn't know what Luo Zhen was going to do. Some people hurriedly shouted at Luo Zhen, "Luo Zhen, what are you doing? Can't let them take Erza away." "Mr. Luo Zhen, you can't let Miss Erza be taken away by them." Lucy even stretched out her hand to block Erza's face, looking at Lucy's face with some fear in her eyes. Luo Zhen didn't care about what everyone in the guild said. After speaking, he turned his head and smiled at the frog and said, "Actually, there are accomplices who damaged the train and the station. I suggest taking them away together." The frog's eyes lit up, and he quickly nodded to Luo Zhen and said, "Thank you very much, Lord Luo Zhen. I will definitely report to the council. Anyone who is with Erza can trouble Master Luo Zhen to tell me who it is." The frog's eyes were a little excited, and he completely forgot the terrifying coercion just now. Luo Zhen looked at the frog with a smile and slowly stood up straight, looking at him calmly. As Luo Zhen's words fell, the frog's smile froze on his face. The steps he was about to take stopped straight away. Cold sweat dripped slowly on the frog's forehead. Swallowing, the frog looked at Luo Zhen with a bright smile and said intermittently, "Lord Luo Zhen, no. Don't joke with the villain." Luo Zhen's smiling face suddenly turned indifferent, and there was no emotion at all in his cold eyes. "Do you think you have a right to joke with me?" Luo Zhen's eyes were cold, and he looked down at the frog in front of him. As Luo Zhen's voice fell, a terrifying coercion instantly swept across the entire square. The frog suddenly felt like a mountain was pressing on him. His legs gave way, and he fell to his knees in front of Luo Zhen with a plop. The whole body was trembling, and the frog was sweating coldly. The terrifying coercion came and suppressed, instantly reminding the frog of the previous scene. He raised his head with difficulty, wanting to beg Luo Zhen for mercy. Seeing Luo Zhen's eyes full of indifference, he suddenly felt that Luo Zhen's back was like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The next moment, under Luo Zhen's terrifying, overbearing arrogance, the frog felt as if something had been pulled out of its body. Holding a touch of transparent soul in his hand, Luo Zhen threw the soul to Zeus in the air. "Go back and tell those members of the Senate who have nothing to eat. If they're still stubborn and want to trouble Fairy Tale, then start with me." Luo Zhen's eyes were extremely indifferent, and he watched the frog say every word with indifference. After finishing speaking, the terrifying, domineering arrogance dissipated. When Luo Zhen's voice fell, the frog had already rolled his eyes and passed out completely. Waving to the soldiers of the council in the distance, the indifferent expression on Luo Zhen's face disappeared. Resuming the smiling appearance before, he returned the frog kneeling in front of him to their hands. He said with a smile, "You must greet the envoy of the House of Appreciation well." The soldiers trembled all over and quickly nodded in agreement. After sending off the envoys of the council, Luo Zhen turned his head and looked at the silent crowd. Luo Zhen said with a smile, "Hey, you don't think I'm really going to hand Erza over to them, do you?" Hearing Luo Zhen's familiar tone, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They were shocked by Luo Zhen's appearance just now. The appearance of Luo Zhen just now is completely different from before. They have never seen Luo Zhen with this appearance before. "Scared me to death, Luo Zhen. I thought you were really going to betray Erza. I knew it. How could Luo Zhen betray his companions? You were the loudest just now." "Nonsense. You want to slander me." Seeing Luo Zhen's familiar face, everyone began to tease Luo Zhen. Only Erza came to Luo Zhen with a worried look. His eyes were full of worry and asked Luo Zhen, "Is it really all right?" Luo Zhen shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't worry. The council is just looking for trouble and wants a trouble fairy tale. They're not going to make a big fuss over such a trivial matter." A cold light flashed in Luo Zhen's eyes, but Erza didn't notice it. At this time, Natsu, who was knocked out by Erza's punch, also woke up. He rushed out of the crowd with a face full of anger, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Hey, what are you looking for?" Gray, who was a natural enemy, saw Natsu's appearance and shouted at Natsu with disgust on his face. "Where are those bastards in the Senate? Why did they take Erza away?" Gray rolled his eyes, looked at Natsu's furious eyes, and said helplessly, "What are you doing?" "They're all gone already." Natsu paused and saw the back of Erza not far away. After stopping in his tracks, he scratched his head and asked curiously, "But didn't they want to take Erza away? Why did they leave?" "What are you thinking? With Luo Zhen here, how could Erza be taken away?" Gray rolled his eyes at Natsu, folded his arms, and said. After listening to Gray's words, Natsu also thought it made sense and nodded. "You perverted BD. Talk as you say. Why do you only take off your underwear?" "What did you say?" "You stupid fire-breathing BD." Without saying a word, the two choked up. Looking at the two who were about to fight, Erza suddenly appeared beside them for some reason. "Don't shoot at your companions." Accompanied by the critical strike of each punch, the two stopped their movements very honestly. With shoulders crossed, he squeezed out a smile in front of Erza. "We're good friends." "Erza, that's right, we're a family." Erza nodded in satisfaction and was very satisfied to see the two of them crossing their shoulders and walking away, and said in a straightforward manner, "That's right, we are all partners in the same guild, just like family." Looking at Erza with his hands on his hips, Luo Zhen held his forehead helplessly. The little girl back then, why did she grow crooked? How can I become a disciplinary committee member now? Erza was so gentle and pleasant back then. Chapter 37, Do These Boring Things. Strip away the magic. After returning to the guild, Luo Zhen did not continue to accept commissions this time. Because Luo Zhen was still in the guild, Erza also stayed in Magnolia for a long time and did not leave to do commissions. Luo Zhen, who has nothing to do, has been sitting in the guild for a long time until late at night these days. The library of the guild contains most of the magic books. Luo Zhen has been looking up magic materials in the library these days. After becoming an S-level wizard, Luo Zhen did not rely solely on the ability of the system. Under the teaching of Ma Karloff, Luo Zhen also awakened his own magic. And there is a very powerful source of magic power in Luo Zhen's body, which makes Carlos the horse frightened. On this day, Luo Zhen was sitting at the bar drinking, holding a chronicle of the kingdom of Fiori in his hand, flipping through it with interest. Suddenly, a sound sounded behind Luo Zhen. I saw Natsu standing not far from Luo Zhen. His fists were burning with flames, and he looked at Luo Zhen's back excitedly. "Luo Zhen, come and fight with me." Luo Zhen turned his head and looked at the excited Natsu with helplessness on his face. Waving to Natsu, Luo Zhen said, "I'm not free. You can find Erza." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Natsu suddenly became angry and shouted at Luo Zhen's back. "Erza went home to cook for you, stinky BD. I really don't understand how Erza likes such boring things." "Luo Zhen, don't dawdle. Come and fight with me." Looking at Luo Zhen unmoved, Natsu was full of momentum and shouted at Luo Zhen's back. "It's so noisy." Luo Zhen turned around impatiently and put down the book in his hand. The next moment, a purple magic circle formed in Luo Zhen's palm. Deprivation of the five senses. A magic power surged out of Luo Zhen's body. The next moment, Natsu's eyes suddenly went dark, and no sound could be heard in his ears. Vision, hearing, smell, touch, and taste all disappeared at this moment. Natsu suddenly became frightened and shouted loudly to the surroundings. "Hey, Luo Zhen, Gray, Happy, where are you? Why can't I see anything? Can you hear me?" Natsu stretched out his hands and rubbed them in front of him, wanting to touch the figures of others. Seeing Natsu's strange behavior, Happy quickly waved her little wings and came to Natsu, holding Natsu's arm tightly. But Natsu seemed to have no feeling, still shouting loudly. At this time, Luo Zhen snapped his fingers, and Natsu's dark cast suddenly returned to light. After seeing everything in front of him clearly, he hugged Happy beside him tightly in his arms. Looking like the rest of his life, he said to Happy, "Happy, you know what? Just now I suddenly went to a very dark place. I couldn't hear or see anything. It scared me to death." Feeling Natsu hugging her tightly, Happy quickly broke free from Natsu's arms. Looking at the expression on Natsu's face, Happy said wonderingly, "Natsu, are you stupid? You were in the guild just now, and you couldn't hear me calling you all the time. How is this going?" Natsu only remembered the magic circle emerging from Luo Zhen's palm, and then his eyes suddenly went dark, and he couldn't feel anything. Casting his eyes on Luo Zhen, Natsu hurriedly asked Luo Zhen, "Was it your fault just now?" Hey, Natsu, you're the one who keeps saying you want to fight me, but I'm up for it." Luo Zhen's head was full of black lines, and he pushed Natsu, who was close in front of him, to the side. What the hell happened just now? Curious, Natsu squeezed to Luo Zhen's side again, trying to figure out what just happened. "My magic, take it away." Luo Zhen raised his arm, and Purple's magic circle emerged in Luo Zhen's palm. Seeing the magic circle of this number, Natsu quickly backed away, looking at Luo Zhen vigilantly. Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, squeezed his palm, and Purple's magic circle disappeared immediately. Deprivation? Was it your magic just now? Hearing what Luo Zhen said, everyone in the guild approached curiously. Makarlov squinted his eyes. Obviously, he had known this for a long time. "That's right. My magic can deprive the opponent of everything, such as the five senses and magic power." Luo Zhen smiled, and a huge magic circle emerged under his feet. The next moment, everyone in this magic circle suddenly felt that the magic power in their bodies completely disappeared. The place where the magic power is stored is like a dry pond that has been drained dry. Everyone was terrified and surprised to feel this scene. This magic is too strong. It's exactly the same ability as a bug. Luo Zhen's strength is so strong. Coupled with this kind of bug magic, the Holy 10 Wizards may not be able to be Luo Zhen's opponent. Listening to the words of the people in the guild, Carlos the horse beside him suddenly spit out a mouthful of wine. Looking awkwardly at the members of the guild who were looking at him, Carlos Ma waved his hand quickly. Because of what Macau said just now, Carlos Ma remembered some bad things. "I remember that it was a year ago when Luo Zhen awakened the magic called deprivation. Afterwards, a request for combat was made to Ma Karlov. At first, Carlos refused. After all, he was so old that he couldn't bully a kid like Luo Zhen. However, after repeated requests from Luo Zhen, Carlos the horse still accepted the challenge. However, just after Ma Karlov took up the challenge, he suddenly felt that his magic power was blocked and completely disappeared. The horse Carlo, who didn't react at the time, was sent flying by Luo Zhen's punch and fell heavily to the ground. Thinking of Luo Zhen, who doesn't talk about martial arts so much, sneak attacking an elderly man like himself, Ma Karlov just couldn't get angry. This also proves that the current Luo Zhen fully possesses the strength of 10 wizard saints. After the magic was released, everyone felt the magic power returning to their bodies, and they breathed a sigh of relief. "I won't tell you. I'll go home for dinner." Putting down the book in his hand, Luo Zhen patted his butt and stood up, walking towards the outside of the guild with his hand behind his back. Not far from Carlo's horse, Natsu stared blankly at his hands. "Did I lose completely before I fought Luo Zhen? Even deprived of the five senses, how could he still be the opponent of Luo Zhen?" Chapter 38, Who in the Family Knows? My grandpa sold me. Looking at Natsu's blank eyes, Ma Karlov suddenly appeared behind Natsu, stretched out his hand, and patted Natsu's arm. Natsu lowered his head in confusion and glanced at Carlo the horse behind him. "Hey, Natsu, what's the matter with your expression?" Standing behind Natsu, Ma Carlo shouted at Natsu with his hands behind his back and a smile on his face. With a bitter smile on Natsu's face, looking at his hands, he muttered to himself, "Master, I can't even break Luo Zhen's magic. Can I really become a powerful mage? Looking at Natsu's depressed eyes, Ma Carlos grinned and said to Natsu, "Let me tell you a secret. A long time ago, when Legerses had not become a mage, his body was very weak because there was a strong magic power in his body, and his body couldn't support this magic power. Die from this magical power in my body, then what?" Listening to Mr. Carlo's story, Natsu rekindled a little fighting spirit in his eyes and asked Mr. Carlo immediately. After he became a wizard, he used the power that almost killed him and became a powerful wizard. If the original Legoses also gave up on himself because of this trivial matter, would there still be the current Legoses? After speaking, he patted Natsu's arm, and Mrs. Carlo didn't say much, turned around and walked towards the bar. Looking at Carlo's back, Natsu was silent for a long time. Finally, fighting spirit was rekindled in Natsu's eyes. He shouted at the back of the horse Carlo, "I know, old man, I will definitely become a powerful mage. One day, I will defeat Luo Zhen, Legerthes, and Gildarts, and become the strongest mage in fairy tale. Until Natsu Dragnil's fame resounds across the continent." Hearing Natsu's words, Makarlov's expression froze instantly, and he looked at Natsu, who left the guild excitedly. Makarlov was silent for a long time, finally sighed, and said silently, "Beat Luo Zhen, Natsu, come on." Although Natsu has lost magic, Makarlov thought from the bottom of his heart that it would be very difficult to defeat Luo Zhen with the current Natsu. Snort. At this moment, a cold snort suddenly came from the second floor. Makarlov looked up and saw Legerses sitting cross-legged on the railing on the second floor, looking at him with a gloomy expression. Makarlov's face froze, and his expression froze instantly. Obviously, Legerses also heard what he said to Natsu before. Seeing Legerses' unfriendly gaze, Makarlov coughed lightly and looked away. Then a smile appeared on his face. He raised his head and smiled at Legerses and said, "Legerses, when did you come back? Come back when you just said something about me." Legerses looked extremely unfriendly, staring at the horse Carlo, and snorted coldly. In Legerses' heart, the memories of his childhood are the scars that Legerses does not allow outsiders to uncover. Now being told by his own grandfather, this inevitably made Legerses feel upset. Makarlov smiled brightly, not knowing how to communicate with Legerses. However, Legerses didn't talk nonsense with the horseman Carlo, and turned his head away from the horseman Carlo's sight. Looking at the lone Legerses, Makarlov sighed deeply. As soon as Luo Zhen returned home, a scent entered Luo Zhen's nostrils. Taking a deep breath, a gentle smile appeared on Luo Zhen's face. Walking towards the kitchen, I saw the familiar figure wearing an apron busy in the kitchen at a glance. Luo Zhen didn't bother Erza, leaning against the kitchen door with folded arms, just quietly watching Erza's busy back. At this time, Erza turned around suddenly and saw Luo Zhen behind him. His body trembled slightly, startled by Luo Zhen standing there suddenly. Erza gave Luo Zhen a blank look and said to Luo Zhen angrily, "I was scared to death. Why are you here all of a sudden?" Scratching his head, Luo Zhen's face was gentle, and he said to Erza with a smile, "Didn't I see that you were busy, so I dare not disturb you?" Rolling his eyes at Luo Zhen, Erza brought the last dish in his hand to the table and served Luo Zhen with a good meal. "Wash your hands and eat." He took off his apron and sat at the dining table waiting for Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen washed his hands, sat at the dining table, and took a deep breath. "It smells so good, it's Erza." Before tasting it, Luo Zhen felt that his stomach was about to move. "Then you eat quickly." Hearing Luo Zhen's praise, Erza showed a happy expression on his face, resting his chin with both hands, just staring at Luo Zhen intently. Because it has been a long time since the two of them sat together and had a good meal. After eating enough, Luo Zhen and Erza sat quietly on the sofa in the living room. Erza leaned on Luo Zhen's shoulder, enjoying this moment of tranquility. As the sun went down, darkness gradually enveloped Magnolia. "Shall we go out for a walk?" Looking at Erza, who was holding his arm and leaning on his shoulder, Luo Zhen turned his head slightly, put his chin on Erza's forehead, and asked in a gentle voice. Erza nodded and followed Luo Zhen without saying a word. The two walked arm in arm under the streetlights. Luo Zhen, Suddenly, Erza looked hesitant to speak, wanting to say something, but didn't want to say it. Luo Zhen raised his brows slightly, looked at the awkward Erza, and said with a joke, "How can that majestic fairy queen show a little woman like this?" Erza gave Luo Zhen a blank look and then fell silent for a while. After the silence, Erza said to Luo Zhen, "Yesterday, the president told me that the council has given me a commission and said that I must complete it." Luo Zhen frowned. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Senate? What entrustment?" The moonlight shone on the two of them. Luo Zhen's complexion became colder and colder under the silvery white moonlight, and the cold light flickered in his eyes. Erza shook his head and said, "The president didn't say anything. He just asked me to stay in the guild to rest for a while. The commission from the Senate has not yet been sent to the president, but he just notified you in advance." Luo Zhen nodded, and then didn't continue to ask, but the cold light in his eyes became colder and colder. Chapter 39. Natsu Who Stole the S-Level Entrustment. Under the darkness, two figures were sneaking around in the dark guild. One of the figures waved its small wings and rushed straight to the second floor of the guild. After picking up an order form on the second floor, the two left the guild directly. In an alley away from the guild, one of the figures held up the order in his hand, looked at the other with a worried face, and said, "Natsu, are we really going to do this?" Natsu's eyes were serious. His fists collided in the darkness, and he said with enthusiasm, "I want to prove to the president and Luo Zhen that I already have the strength of an S-level mage, and I will definitely complete this commission." Looking at the passionate Natsu, Happy believed in Natsu unconditionally. When the two left Magnolia, a figure sneaked behind them. He looked at Natsu, who was going away with serious eyes. Natsu is crazy. He secretly wants to complete the S-level commission. Gray stood in the dark, watching Natsu's face sinking into the distance. The difficulty of the S-level commission is extraordinary. Even Mira Jane, who became an S-level mage, almost killed Lisana in the commission. What's more, they're only Natsu and Happy. Worried in his heart, he gritted his teeth and turned to Mr. Carlo the horse. Carlo, who was woken up in the middle of the night, was full of anger and became even more angry after hearing Gray's words. Slapping the table in front of him, the whole person was furious and shouted at Gray, "Gray, is everything you said true?" Gray nodded heavily and said with the same serious expression, "I heard what Natsu said with my own ears, but I don't know which commission he wants to complete." Karloff nodded and then said to Gray with a serious expression, "Gray, you go to catch up with Natsu and the others now, and you must bring them back." Gray nodded heavily and left the stable Carlo's house in a short while. After Gray left, Carlos the stable also got dressed and went to the guild. I checked the entrustment section on the second floor and found the order that Natsu had secretly taken away. Suddenly, Karloff shifted his gaze to a dark corner. "Lajerses, have you been here all this time?" A figure appeared in the darkness. Lajerses opened his eyes. His eyes were incomparably indifferent. He grinned at Carlos the horse and said, "Old man, it's been a long time since you want to care about my grandson. Lagerus, I'm not kidding you. Why didn't you stop Natsu?" Karloff burst out with a surge of momentum, looking at Lajerses with turbulent eyes, and asked. Lajerses sneered, not paying attention to Mr. Carlos' question at all. If someone else needs to intervene in this kind of thing, then he should quit Fairy Tail as soon as possible. Fairy Tail doesn't need such a useless mage. With indifferent eyes, Lajerses glanced at Karloff and said with a sneer, "You." Karloff frowned, looking at the helplessness on the face of the rebellious Lajerses. Because of Ivan's incident, Lagoses became what it is now. Sighing and looking at Lagasis full of disappointment, Carlos turned his head and went down to the second floor. Glanced by Karloff's eyes full of disappointment, Lajerses seemed to be pierced by a sharp thorn in his heart. Angrily shouted at Carlos' back, "I am your grandson. You never cared about me. Fairy Tail doesn't need the existence of these weaklings." Lagerdas, Fairy Tale is a big family. If you join Fairy Tale, then everyone is a family. Before you understand this truth, you will never be a qualified Fairy Tale mage. Ma Karloff didn't talk too much nonsense with Lagerses and turned his head and left the guild straight away. He didn't notice the gloomy face of Lagerses behind him at all. After leaving the guild, Carlos Ma's complexion was not good. He glanced at the dark moonlight in the distance, and his complexion was heavy. After thinking about it, Mr. Carlo had no choice but to go to Luo Zhen's house. In a living room of Luo Zhen's home, Luo Zhen was crossing his arms with a face full of displeasure, looking at the horseman Carlo on the opposite side with an unkind expression. Erza at the side looked at Mrs. Carlo's heavy complexion, pushed Luo Zhen's arm, and then asked Mrs. Carlos, "President, what are you looking for us in the middle of the night for?" Carlos Ma nodded, and then told the two of them in detail. As Carlos Ma's words fell, Erza immediately stood up and asked with a frosty face, "Is Natsu crazy? Doesn't he know that S-level wizards are not allowed to go to the second floor to receive commissions?" Erza was furious and extremely disappointed with Natsu's actions. "Erza, Gray has gone after Natsu, but whether he can bring Natsu back is another matter. So I hope you and Luo Zhen can set off to Alcatraz and bring that BD Natsu back." Ma Karloff sighed deeply, looked at the frosty Erza, and said, without waiting for Luo Zhen's response. Erza immediately nodded in agreement. The pajamas on his body turned into armor after a flash of white light, and he said seriously, "President, leave it to us." Looking at Erza, who was ready, Carlos the horse heaved a sigh of relief. Hey, why don't you ask me for my opinion?" Seeing that the two passed him directly, Luo Zhen shouted at the two who were discussing the problem with a face full of black lines. Erza stared and stood beside Luo Zhen with his hands on his hips. He just stared straight at Luo Zhen without saying a word. "Okay, I'll go too." Being stared at so silently by Erza, Luo Zhen was finally defeated and said helplessly, spreading his hands. Seeing Luo Zhen agree to come down, Erza Sundara turned his head and snorted coquettishly. After the horseman Carlos left, Erza completed the preparations for the entrustment. Looking at the huge package in front of him, Luo Zhen couldn't help but drop a drop of cold sweat on his forehead. "Erza, there's no need to make such a fuss." With a dry smile on Luo Zhen's face, he said to Erza brightly. Erza frowned, folded his arms, and said, "It's just some clothes and necessities inside." With a dark face, Luo Zhen said helplessly, "Erza, we just went out to do an ordinary commission, and we will be back in a maximum of 3 days. It's unnecessary. It's really unnecessary." Under Luo Zhen's persuasion, Erza reluctantly gave up such a big package. Chapter 40. You engage in a sneak attack. Don't talk about Wuda. Gray chased and finally caught up with Natsu at a port. When he came to the port, he saw 3 figures not far away, and Gray's expression sank. When I listened to Natsu before, there were only Natsu and Happy, but now there are more people. Taking a closer look, the extra person is the newly joined Lucy. Natsu and the others waited anxiously at the port because they could not find a ship to Galena Island. Suddenly, a familiar sound came from behind. "Natsu, you fire-breathing idiot. Just stop." Hearing the familiar voice, Natsu turned his head away and looked at Gray behind him with an uneasy face. "Why are you here?" Seeing Natsu's displeased face, Gray frowned, walked straight up to Natsu, grabbed Natsu by the collar, and shouted loudly, "You idiot! Do you know what you're doing?" "Of course I know. Let me go." Natsu slapped Gray's arm away and said with high spirits, "I want to complete the S-level commission, and I want to prove to the president that my strength is enough to be an S-level mage." "Fool!" Gray scolded, pointed at the 3 of Natsu, and said, "The president already knows that you secretly took away the S-rank orders, so let me take you back. If you are still stubborn, Erza and Luo Zhen will come later." After Gray's voice fell, the expressions of Happy and Lucy changed suddenly. Immediately, Happy flapped her wings and came to Gray's side, folded her arms, and said to Natsu, "Natsu, let's go back. This commission is not something we can complete. Yeah. Natsu, let's go back and admit our mistakes to the president." Hearing the names of Erza and Luo Zhen, Lucy and Happy immediately gave up. 1-on-3 at one time became 3-on-1. Even if it's just me, I have to go to Galena Island to complete this commission. Looking at the rebellious Happy and Lucy, Natsu shouted loudly. Suddenly, a ship sailed in the distance. With joy in his eyes, Natsu jumped up on the harbor and jumped directly onto the ship, surprised by the sudden appearance of Natsu. The captain of the ship quickly raised his weapon and looked at Natsu nervously. "Don't be nervous. I want to go to Galena Island. Can you give me a ride?" Standing on the deck, Natsu's face became extremely ugly. Natsu forced out a smile and asked the boatman. Hearing the name of the island from Natsu's mouth, the boatman immediately shook his head. "That island is a cursed island, and there are demons on it. I won't go there." "Natsu, UBD." Natsu jumps onto the boat suddenly, catching Gray off guard. "Ice make ice bird." A blue magic circle emerged under Gray's feet, and then a lifelike ice blue bird appeared behind Gray. Gray jumped up and onto the big bird's back. Under Gray's control, the big bird came straight to the ship. Seeing this scene, Natsu was about to use his magic. But with the shaking of the ship, Natsu's complexion became ugly for a while, and he almost vomited out. Gray jumped onto the deck and grabbed Natsu's arm before heading back to shore. But when the boatman saw that Gray and Natsu were both mages, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he said to them quickly, "Are you all mages? If you are mages, I can take you go to Galena Island." Just as Gray was about to refuse, Natsu, who was caught in his hands, suddenly jumped up. A punch landed on the back of Gray's head, and Gray turned his head to stare at Natsu before passing out. "You engage in a sneak attack. You don't talk about martial arts." After knocking Gray out, Natsu shouted at Natsu and Lucy on the shore. "We are all on the same boat now. If you go back, the president will not let you go. Why don't we complete this commission together? At that time, we will also have credit." I have to say that Natsu really used his brain this time. Lucy couldn't refuse Natsu's words for a while, and after looking at Happy, he finally compromised. Under the leadership of the boatman, a group of people set off straight to the island. But not long after Natsu and the others left, the figures of Luo Zhen and Erza jumped down from Zeus and landed straight on the ground of the port. Seeing that there was no one at the port, Erza frowned and murmured, "Natsu and the others must have set off already." Under the knowledgeable and domineering perception, there is no one around. Luo Zhen shook his head and said, "There is no one else nearby. They should have already set off. What the hell is this guy Gray doing?" Erza frowned and shouted loudly. Then he said to Luo Zhen, "Let's hurry up. Natsu and the others may already be on the island." Luo Zhen nodded, took Erza to Zeus's back, and rushed straight to Galena Island. Zeus was very fast, and after a while, he saw an island in a place full of fog. In this island, everywhere is shrouded in darkness, and the eerie feeling in this island is particularly heavy. Arriving on the island, Luo Zhen's arrogance enveloped the entire island in an instant. After searching around, Luo Zhen frowned and said, "Natsu, they haven't come to the island yet." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza couldn't help but look down, looking at the rough sea in the distance. "Then let's wait for them here." After an unknown amount of time, the shadow of a ship suddenly appeared on the rough sea. "Coming." Luo Zhen opened his eyes, looked at the shaking ship, and said intently. Erza stood up, looking at the swaying ship expectantly. "Look, there are two people over there." On the bed, Lucy and Happy were clutching the mast tightly, and were almost thrown into the sea by the shaking of the ship. Suddenly, Lucy pointed to the shore of the distant island and called out to Natsu and Gray in the cabin. Gray was tied up by them, glaring at Natsu, who was seasick. "You fire-breathing BD. I'm going to beat you up sooner or later." Gray shouted at Natsu with his limbs bound. Natsu's face was full of discomfort. Lying on the deck and vomiting into the sea, he didn't want to quarrel with Gray anymore. Those two seemed familiar. Suddenly, Happy narrowed his eyes, staring at the two people on the shore, and said. Gray crawled out of the cabin and looked at the two very familiar figures on the shore. Suddenly, Gray's eyes became joyful, and he laughed loudly and said, "It's Luo Zhen and Erza." Luo Zhen and Erza are here. Chapter 41, I was kidnapped. I was wronged. It's Luo Zhen and Erza. Luo Zhen and Erza are here. Seeing the two familiar figures on the coast, Gray's eyes were full of excitement, and he stood up struggling. Just when he was about to yell, Natsu behind him suddenly yelled at Happy and Lucy, "Stop him!" Exchanging glances with Happy, Lucy threw Gray down directly, covering Gray's mouth firmly. Now that we have boarded the pirate ship, we have no choice but to go all the way to the dark. Gray was struggling violently, but was pressed firmly on the bed by Lucy, covering his mouth and making no movement. Hey, you guys are so excited, going out to sea in the middle of the night. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from above everyone's heads. The expression on Lucy's face froze instantly, and Happy turned her head dully. I saw Zeus floating above the boat, grinning and watching everyone. Zeus! Lucy let go of Gray and quickly curled up in the corner, looking at Zeus floating in midair in surprise. Hey, Zeus, I was kidnapped by Natsu and Lucy. You finally came to rescue me. Happy waved her little wings, came to Zeus's side without tears, and threw herself into Zeus's soft body. Happy, you traitor! Looking at the rebellious Happy, Lucy was full of tears and quickly waved her hands to explain. Don't tell me. The master is waiting for you on the island. Please explain to the master. The relationship between Zeus and Happy is still good, and he didn't refuse Happy to rub against his body. He grinned and said, looking at the ugly and crying Lucy on the boat. As the ship docked, Natsu, who was still like a salted fish, suddenly came back to life. Finally alive, jumping up directly from the ground, Natsu looked at the two figures approaching not far away with a vigilant face. Let's go. Natsu hurriedly pulled Lucy to flee towards the interior of the island. Who would have thought? Suddenly lost sight in front of the eyes, and a darkness enveloped Natsu and Lucy. Deprivation of the five senses. Luo Zhen in the distance snapped his fingers, and Natsu and Lucy immediately ran around like headless chickens. Yo, Gray, what kind of look do you have? After Luo Zhen and Erza approached, they saw Gray, whose limbs were bound and unable to move on the deck. Luo Zhen had a teasing smile on his face and teased Gray. Luo Zhen, let me go. I'm going to beat that BD hard. Gray blushed and shouted at Luo Zhen. With a wave of his hand, Prometheus, who was floating in the air, spewed out a small fireball from his mouth and burned the rope on Gray's body. Gray's face was darkened after being unbound, and he walked towards Natsu, who was running around step by step. A heavy punch hit Natsu's face, causing Natsu to let out a scream. You fire-breathing idiot. Do you know what you've done? Knocking Natsu to the ground, Gray straddles Natsu and punches Natsu in the face. Luo Zhen snapped his fingers to relieve the deprivation of the five senses. The next moment, Natsu suddenly jumped up and punched Gray on the cheek. The two wrestled on the beach. Erza didn't stop the fight between the two of them and walked in front of Lucy with a heavy face. He squatted down and looked directly into Lucy's eyes with a serious face. Lucy, Natsu is an idiot. Are you an idiot too? Before you become an S-level mage, you're not allowed to accept S-level commissions anyway, and those who violate it will be expelled from the guild. Hearing what Erza said, Lucy's face turned pale in an instant. Expelled from the guild? I finally joined Fairy Tale. Lucy quickly raised her head, apologizing to Erza with tears in her eyes. Lucy didn't push the responsibility to Natsu's head and told her mistakes very sincerely. After hearing Lucy's apology, Erza nodded and said, I will truthfully tell the president what you said, and it depends on your luck as to how the president decides. Lucy's face was ashen, and she nodded with a bitter smile on her face. Seeing the gray expression on Lucy's face, Erza did not comfort Lucy. After all, Lucy is already a qualified mage, and he has to bear the consequences if he makes a mistake. Frosty-faced, Erza walked over to Gray and Natsu, who were scuffling on the sand. A heavy punch hit the heads of the two of them. Seeing Erza approaching, the two stopped in a tacit understanding. Natsu, do you know what stupid thing you did? Erza had a frosty face, stared straight at Natsu and asked. Being stared at by Erza like this Natsu lowered his head shyly, not daring to answer. Gray was complacent and suddenly saw Erza looking at him, and quickly put away that complacent look. And you, Gray, didn't the president tell you to stop Natsu and Lucy? Why are you here? Gray spoke anxiously, wanting to explain to Erza. Needless to say, before Gray could speak, Erza interrupted Gray with a wave of his hand. He looked at the two people in front of him with disappointment in his eyes. You guys really let me down. Erza's words echoed in the ears of the two, and Gray's face was full of tears. I am really wronged. Now you all go back to the guild, arms folded. Erza yelled at Natsu like the parents of the two. Natsu lowered his head helplessly, turned around silently, and walked towards the boat. At this time, there was a sudden sound of intensive footsteps behind him. Everyone turned their heads and saw a group of people in key costumes appearing behind them. These people looked at Erza and others with sincere eyes, ecstatically. You, are you here to help our mage? An old man in the lead looking expectantly at Luo Zhen and his group, and asked. Suddenly, Lucy pointed to a familiar figure in the crowd and shouted, It's you. You are the boatman. Hearing Lucy's words, Natsu and Gray suddenly raised their heads and looked in the direction Lucy pointed. Sure enough, a familiar figure was standing in the crowd. He is the old man's son, and the cursed one on Galuna Island. With a bitter face, the old man glanced at the villagers behind him, and then said to everyone, Listen to my son. You are here to help our mages, aren't you? Chapter 42. The Strange Purple Moon. Devil's Village. Watched by the expectant eyes of the old man, Erza was in a dilemma for a while. It would not be in compliance with the regulations if he stayed to solve this commission. And if he just left, seeing the expectant eyes of these villagers, Erza felt very uncomfortable. Turning his eyes to Luo Zhen, who was playing with Happy not far away, Erza was silent for a moment. Yes, we are the mages of Fairy Tale, the mages who accepted your commission and came to handle the commission. After a while, Erza raised his head, looked at the village head firmly, and said, As an S-class mage, Erza can accept commissions in the guild when there are no commissions. Although it was not in compliance with the regulations to accept the commission temporarily, Erza also temporarily left the guild's rules behind. Hearing Erza's words, Gray's face was full of surprise. Just when he was about to speak, Natsu jumped up from behind and directly covered Gray's mouth, sitting firmly on Gray's back, pinning him to the ground. You ISBD, stop talking. Now that Erza has accepted the commission, Natsu is the happiest. Being forcefully interrupted by Natsu, Gray rolled over and pushed Natsu aside. After a while, the two continued to wrestle on the ground. The villagers not far away saw Gray and Natsu wrestling on the beach, and they couldn't help feeling a little overwhelmed. Leave them alone. Erza waved his hand, looking at the wrestling Natsu and Gray as if he was used to it. Then tell us what happened and what the commission was for. Erza hasn't seen the order yet and doesn't know what the content of the order is. Hearing Erza's words, the village chief nodded and led Erza and his party to their village. Their village is very backward, full of houses made of branches and roofs made of leaves. Walking into the village, Erza and the others already felt that the atmosphere was not quite right. Following behind the village chief, Erza walked up to Luo Zhen and said to Luo Zhen, why does this village feel strange? Luo Zhen nodded, leaned into Erza's ear and said, Heaven. Following Luo Zhen's reminder, Erza raised his head and looked towards the sky. A strange purple moon hangs in the dark sky, and dots of starlight are dotted around this purple moon. Erza's pupils shrank, and suddenly his vision blurred. Don't stare. Just as Erza was staring straight at the purple moon, Luo Zhen stretched out his hand to block Erza's eyes. Erza regained his composure suddenly and said in a low voice, There's something wrong with that moon. The two of Luo Zhen were whispering, and Lucy and the others behind them didn't know what happened. Natsu Gray walked on both sides of Lucy, one left and one right, and Happy was waving her wings and playing with Zeus Prometheus in front. Come to the center of the village. Where is the village chief's house? Dear guest, please come in. The village head welcomed Luo Zhen and others warmly, and welcomed Luo Zhen and others into the house. After Luo Zhen and the others were seated, the village chief took off his mask, revealing a ferocious and terrifying face. Seeing this face, Lucy cried out in fright and looked at the village chief in horror. Demon! Lucy's exclamation echoed in the small room, and everyone's eyes fell on Lucy in an instant. Being stared at by everyone like this, Lucy forgot to be afraid for a while and lowered her head in embarrassment. As you can see, because of the curse of the purple moon in the sky, all the inhabitants of our island have turned into this monster. Outside the house, the villagers also turned into demons one after another, and the whole village became extremely terrifying for a while. So, what is the content of the commission? Looking at the terrifying village head, Luo Zhen asked the village head calmly with a calm expression. Destroy the moon. The village chief looked at Luo Zhen with piercing eyes, and he could tell that Luo Zhen and Erza were obviously the people in charge among them. And Erza was headed by Luo Zhen, so the village head looked directly at Luo Zhen. After the village chief's voice fell, Luo Zhen stood up directly. He cupped his fists at the village chief. Farewell. After finishing speaking, Luo Zhen turned his head and left. Hey, wait, Luo Zhen. Wait a minute. Seeing Luo Zhen's resolute and non-procrastinating actions, the village chief quickly got up and called out to stop Luo Zhen's back. Master Village Chief, we are mages, not gods. Destroying the moon? You think highly of us too. Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, spread his hands, and said. The village head also fell silent, with a dry smile on his face. It's just that even if the ferocious and terrifying face smiled, it was still more terrifying. Then changed the content of the commission to lift the curse on the island. The village chief hesitated for a moment and looked at Luo Zhen expectantly. Under the expectant eyes of the village chief, Luo Zhen nodded and agreed. Very good. Seeing that Luo Zhen agreed, the village head burst into cheers. The voice of the village chief's cheers spread outside the house, and the villagers outside also started to cheer. All of a sudden, the whole village began to dance like demons. After everyone bid farewell to the village chief and left the village, Natsu and others followed behind Luo Zhen and asked Luo Zhen's back, Luo Zhen, what shall we do now? See there, pointing to a mountain in the distance, there's a dilapidated temple there. Looking in the direction of Luo Zhen's finger, everyone saw the wreckage of the temple. Go there first and have a look, and we'll talk about it later. In fact, when Luo Zhen landed on the island, his knowledge and domineering aura had already enveloped the entire island. It has long been perceived that there are several unusual auras in that temple, and one aura is extremely powerful. All the people here are wizards, and their steps are not slow. It didn't take long to arrive at this dilapidated temple. Just as everyone was about to step into the temple, several figures suddenly appeared not far from Luo Zhen and his party, blocking their way. Stop! The few people who appeared were wearing black robes and a mask, and stopped Luo Zhen and others. Who are you? The sudden appearance of several people made Erza and others vigilant. Deprivation of magic power. Just as the two sides were still confronting each other, a magic circle appeared at Luo Zhen's feet. The purple magic circle engulfed everyone. The next moment, the people on the opposite side suddenly felt that all the magic power in their bodies had disappeared, and horror flashed in their eyes. Chapter 43. A duel with the same sect. Gray versus Leon. What's going on? Why did my magic power disappear? My magic power is gone. What's going on? It's his fault. The few people who appeared looked terrified, feeling the exhausted magic power in their bodies, and looked at Luo Zhen in horror. Natsu, I leave it to you. He glanced at these people with calm eyes and shouted at Gray Natsu and the two behind him. The two looked at each other and rushed forward one after another, screaming strangely. Within moments, the three were knocked to the ground by Natsu Gray. Losing their magic power and not being as good at fisting as Natsu Gray, the three were soon overpowered. With an unfriendly expression, Gray came to one of them and punched him heavily in the face. What is your purpose on the island? Did the villagers on the island become like this because of you? Punched in the face by Gray, The man passed out as soon as he rolled his eyes. Before Gray was ready to ask the next person, Luo Zhen waved his hands to the crowd and said, "Just tie them up and throw them here. I think the mastermind behind the scenes is in front." Gray gave the remaining 2 men a vicious look and tied the 3 of them tightly with a rope and threw them aside. A group of people continued to move forward, and there was darkness in the dilapidated temple. The invisible environment made Natsu and the others nervous. Prometheus floated not far from Luo Zhen, illuminating the way ahead for the group. Not long after, in a huge cave, a huge body suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. Dear Lionla, the moment he saw this huge figure, Gray suddenly let out an exclamation. This huge body was sealed by a piece of blue ice, and its ferocious face was lifelike. "Gray, do you know him?" Seeing Gray's strange appearance, Erza and others were a little puzzled and asked Gray. After a long silence, Gray was about to speak. Suddenly, an indifferent voice echoed in everyone's ears. "Of course he does." A man wearing a mask and covered in black robes appeared in front of Dai Lion. He looked at the crowd unkindly and paused as soon as his eyes swept over Gray. A sneer appeared on the face under the mask, and then viciously swept across everyone present. "Are you the wizards of fairy tale?" The figure had sharp eyes, scanning Luo Zhen and his party vigilantly. "Who the hell are you guys? Why is Lionla here?" Gray blushed furiously and glared at the man in black with red eyes. "Still don't recognize me, Gray?" The man in black smiled coldly and then swung his right hand in front of him. An ice blade suddenly appeared, slashing straight at Gray. "Leon, why is it you?" Dodging the ice blade's attack, Gray suddenly realized, with a look of disbelief in his eyes. "Why did you bring Lion here? What the hell are you trying to do?" Gritting his teeth, Gray roared at Leon. "What? To break the seal of Dai Lion, of course." The face under Leon's mask was full of madness, and he turned his head madly to look at Dai Lion behind him. Stretching out his hand on the ice, he muttered to himself sickly, "Ulu, as long as I defeat Dai Lionla, I will surpass you." At this moment, Leon has fallen into madness, wanting to prove his own strength. "Leon, you are crazy. Dai Lionla was sealed by URU at the cost of his life, and you want to undo Dai Lionla's seal for such a boring purpose." Gray was furious and wanted to rush forward regardless of Erza's stop. "Gray, what do you know? In order to surpass Ulu, I spent so much time learning magic every day, but Ulu is willing to sacrifice his life to seal this demon just to save you. Ulu is dead. So who else do I want to surpass? Since Ulu can't defeat Dai Lionla, if I can defeat him, I've already surpassed Ulu." With crazy eyes, Leon tore off his mask and roared at Gray. The scar was uncovered, and Gray felt a stabbing pain in his heart. If it wasn't for him, Ulu wouldn't have died. Gray looked lonely and couldn't help but lose his balance and took 2 steps back. Natsu stepped forward and grabbed Gray's back. "Although I don't know what happened between you two, I absolutely don't allow anyone to destroy a thing that I have to do, even if I sacrifice my life." Natsu's fists collided, flames spreading from his fists. "Natsu, stop." Suddenly, Luo Zhen's voice echoed in the empty underground cave. Everyone focused on Luo Zhen, and Natsu was about to ask Luo Zhen why he stopped him. "Gray, since he is your senior brother, and you are here for your master, then let it be handed over to you. No problem." Luo Zhen turned his head, looked at Gray, who was in a daze, and said with a smile. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Gray raised his head blankly. The crowd had never seen Gray's nano look. Gritting his teeth, Gray's eyes lit up with fighting spirit. His eyes became firm, and he said, "No problem, leave it to me." Blue's magic circle emerged from the ice under his feet. Gray's right hand turned into a fist and placed in the palm of his left hand. "Leon, come on. Let's fight it out with what URU taught us." Looking at Gray, who cheered up, Leon's eyes flashed a little relief. "Gray, come on." Leon didn't cast magic with both hands like Gray did. With a wave of his arm, Bing Blue's magic circle also appeared at his feet. The ice magic battle between the two quickly unfolded with dazzling modeling magic. All kinds of wonderful creations are formed in the hands of the two. Just as the two were fighting, Luo Zhen walked up to Dai Lion at this moment. Gently place your palms on top of the ice cubes. A faint spirit could be felt within the ice. On the top of the ice cube, a purple beam of light was falling on the ice cube, slowly melting the huge ice cube. At the same time, what could be sensed is the powerful soul power contained in Dai Lion's body. A smile appeared on Luo Zhen's face, and he couldn't help muttering, "Is this the demon created by Zerif? It's so powerful." Even after being sealed for such a long time, Dai Lion's body could no longer hold on. But the soul in the body is still abundant. Chapter 44, Calamity Demon Dai Lion. Lift the seal. When Luo Zhen checked the icebound Dai Lion, Gray and Leon had already fought. Also from Ulu's sect, the fighting skills of the two are almost the same. The shape magic released by Leon with one hand can create items faster, pressing down on Gray from the beginning. And Gray, who has obeyed Ulu since he was a child, and honestly uses two-handed modeling magic, has a slight gap with Leon in terms of strength. But steadily, it is still difficult for Leon to win Gray in a short time. Natsu and others not far away watched Gray's battle quietly without intervening. Because of what Luo Zhen said just now, this is a battle between Gray's fellow disciples. Even if they wanted to intervene, Gray wouldn't want to. As companions, they naturally respect Gray's wishes. The drops of the moon continued to condense, dripping on the ice that sealed Lionla. A few cracks appeared on this huge ice block, and Del Lion would break out from the seal at any time. Ice make fishing net. The moves here do not use the English names in the original work, which is a bit suspicious of the word count on the ice-covered ground. Gray slid on the ground, putting distance between himself and Leon. With both hands together, Blue's magic circle spread under Gray's feet. The next moment, a huge fishing net of ice appeared in the air, covering Leon directly on the ground. The corner of Leon's mouth twitched into a sneer, and he waved his right hand in front of him, and then a pair of huge ice scissors appeared. The moment the fishing net and the scissors collide, the fishing net is crushed. The sharp scissors rushed towards Gray, about to cut Gray in half. Ice make ice cube. Looking at the ice-blue scissors under the firelight, Gray didn't panic at all. A thick block of ice condensed in front of him, blocking the attack of the scissors. "Gray, it seems that you have improved a lot over the years." Seeing that his attack was blocked, Leon stopped and stared at Gray sharply. Gray showed a bad face, glared at Leon viciously, and shouted, "Leon, stop your behavior now, and I will let you go." "Let me go? Think about yourself first." Leon smiled coldly, although he knew that it would be difficult for him to leave here today. But Leon didn't have any fear in his heart. Ulu's death had already driven Leon into madness. Click! At this moment, a voice suddenly interrupted the battle between the two. A crack suddenly appeared on the huge ice block that sealed Dai Lion, and the crack started to spread continuously from the top until it penetrated the entire ice block. Gray's complexion changed, and he quickly shouted to Luo Zhen, who was directly in front of the ice cube. "Luo Zhen, get out of there!" Luo Zhen ignored Gray and looked up at the cracked ice. The drops of the moon are about to break the ice completely. Gray left Leon behind and rushed straight to Luo Zhen. "Want to leave? Don't pretend I don't exist, Gray." Seeing that Gray wanted to abandon himself and rush towards Lion, Leon stood in front of Gray with a sneer. Looking at Leon in front of him, Gray showed anger and roared angrily. "Leon, don't be obsessed anymore. Have you forgotten the tragedy caused by Lion?" Leon laughed wildly, and his face became a little ferocious because of his wild laughter. Looking at Gray with a smirk, he roared angrily. "How could I have forgotten? If it wasn't for Ulu, I would have been the one who sealed Lion and pulled him. I must kill this monster with my own hands." At the beginning, Gray wanted to use absolute freeze to seal Lionla privately, but was stopped by Ulu. Watching URU use absolute freeze, he taught Gray the last lesson with his life. UBD. Looking at the obsessed Leon, Gray's eyes finally showed unbearable anger. "That's it, Gray. Use your full strength. Use all your strength. In front of Ulu, let her see who has inherited her strongest strength." Seeing the anger in Gray's eyes, Leon not only did not show any discouragement, but roared at Gray with wild laughter. Seal Die Lion pulls cracks in the ice that keep spreading, and it doesn't take long for the ice to go through. Watching the cracks on the ice grow longer and longer, Gray became more and more nervous. A stern look flashed in the depths of his eyes. Ice Make Rose Garden. Ice Blue's magic power overflowed Gray's body, filling the narrow cave within a moment. This is countless icy blue roses suddenly rose from the ground, instantly covering Leon's body. This is Ulu's move. How did you know it? A flash of thought flashed in Leon's eyes, and he couldn't help questioning Gray. Gray didn't answer Leon's words, and the beautiful but dangerous roses suddenly turned. The branches covered with thorns scraped against Leon's body. The blood was sprayed on the roses of Ice Blue, adding a little coquettishness to these roses. Rose Garden's move was mainly to trap Leon. Gray crossed his hands, and a huge scythe appeared in Gray's hand. Ice Make Death Scythe. Grasping the scythe in his hand, Gray's eyes flickered coldly, and his feet slid on the ice, heading straight for Leon. Leon regained his composure. A burst of blue light flickered beside him. As the blue light fell, a giant ice tiger was formed. The giant tiger roared and rushed into the rose garden, destroying the alluring ice blue roses in less than a moment. Gray, who was holding a scythe, had already rushed in front of Leon, slashing at Leon with a huge scythe. Ice Wall. Leon was unhurried, stretching out his hands to form a thick ice wall in front of him, separating himself from Gray. Boom! The sickle slammed heavily on the ice wall, making a loud noise. In the heat of the battle between the two, Erza appeared by Luo Zhen's side with a worried face. Looking at the cracks spreading on the huge ice block, Erza asked worriedly, "Is this seal going to be lifted?" Luo Zhen nodded, looked at Dai Lion who was frozen in front of him, and said, "The purple moon should be caused by Gray's senior brother to break the seal. As long as the ceremony they are performing is interrupted, it should be able to break the seal. The purple moon is gone right above the ice." The two could clearly see Purple's moon just overhead. There was a small hole there, just enough for the moonlight to fall on the top of the lion's head. Chapter 45. Dai Lion pulls back to life. Iceman Home Eyes. Boom! There was a bang, and the shattered ice cubes splashed all around. Luo Zhen quickly shielded Erza in front of her body, and the sharp ice cubes kept hitting Luo Zhen's body, but they couldn't even pierce Luo Zhen's skin. As the mist cleared, Gray and Leon, who were fighting, also stopped. He stared blankly at Dai Lion, who broke the seal from the ice. Frozen for many years, Dai Lion is still alive. A little slowly looked at the strange environment around him and let out a roar that shook the sky. The violent roar echoed throughout Galuna Island, and the villagers in the village looked at the temple on the top of the mountain in horror. Suddenly, Dai Lion stretched out his huge arms and slapped Luo Zhen and Erza directly in front of him. Change. Armor of Vajra. Just when Dai Lion was about to hit Zhong Air with his arm, Erza, who was behind Luo Zhen, rushed out suddenly, wearing a pair of gold armor. Holding Dai Lion's huge body, he shouted to Luo Zhen behind him, "Luo Zhen, go!" Seeing Erza struggling to resist Dai Lion's back, Luo Zhen couldn't help smiling. Stepping forward quickly, he raised his palm and put in Dai Lion's palm. The next moment, Luo Zhen pulled Erza behind him. Erza, who was pulled away by Luo Zhen, hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing?" But before Erza finished speaking, he saw Luo Zhen pushing Dai Lion and pulling towards the front. It depends on the palm that is about to fall on the ground, but there is no way to fall. Boom! The other palm clenched into a fist, and a heavy punch hit Dai Lion's palm. The sound of the explosion echoed in the narrow cave, causing Lucy not far away to cover his ears. "Erza, you don't think I'm really powerless just because of the nickname of the King of Souls, do you?" Pulling Dai Lion away with a punch, Luo Zhen turned his head to look at Erza, and said with a smile. At this time, everyone suddenly recalled. Is Luo Zhen's strongest? Is his soul magic? No, it was Luo Zhen's terrifying physical strength. Although Natsu was the only one who had seen a dragon among the people present, But everyone even thought that Luo was really a giant dragon in human form, and his body was too strong. Roar! Die Lion, who was blown away, stood up because the ice on the lower body had not been lifted, so his movements were very limited. Standing up straight, his eyes filled with fury, he let out a deafening roar at the crowd. The next moment, Luo Zhen stepped on the ground fiercely with both feet, and cracks like spider webs suddenly appeared on the ground. The cracks continued to spread around. Erza quickly put on the Kurobo armor and flew to Lucy's side. As long as there is something wrong, just take Lucy and escape from here. Luo Zhen jumped up and appeared in front of Dai Lion in an instant, clenched his fist tightly with his right hand. A punch fell on Dai Lion's head. With heavy punches, Dai Lion was knocked down when he just stood upright. Without giving Dai Lion a chance to stand up, Luo Zhen knew that Dai Lion's vitality was not much left. After knocking down Dai Lion, a terrifying aura suddenly surged from Luo Zhen's body. This manic and violent breath directly suppressed Dai Lion. Even Del Lion, known as the Disaster Demon, has never seen such a terrifying breath. A look of horror flashed in his eyes. At this moment, Luo Zhen put his right hand on Dai Lion's forehead. A pure and powerful soul was drawn out of Lion's body. A manic roar came from Dai Lion's mouth, and he waved his struggling arms around, trying to throw Luo Zhen, who was standing on his forehead, away. Boom! Clenching his fist with his left hand, he punched heavily into the void around him. The next moment, the space shattered and cracks spread in the air. A terrifying concussion force appeared, shattering Dai Lion's arm. As Dai Lion's struggle weakened, the soul was completely extracted. Looking at Dai Lion, who had completely lost his movement, leaving only a trace of his body, Luo Zhen turned his head and jumped on his forehead. Luo Zhen, what are you going to do? Seeing that Lucy was holding a transparent soul body in her hand, Erza asked, a little puzzled. Luo Zhen didn't answer and walked towards the ice shards that Dai Lion shattered. Finding a relatively large fragment, Luo Zhen integrated the soul extracted from Dai Lion's body into the ice. With the passage of time, a human face suddenly appeared on the ice. Limbs, torso, head are slowly being generated. After opening his eyes, the Iceman's eyes were full of confusion. Raising his head to see Luo Zhen in front of him, his mouth was full of devotion and respect. Owner, you salutes you with allegiance. With the formation of the Iceman, her figure was bumpy, and she knelt down in front of Luo Zhen on one knee. Get up. Luo Zhen's eyes showed satisfaction, and he raised his hand to let him stand up. Then he said to Erza, get her a dress. This Iceman is different from the 3 homies created by Luo Zhen before. Once she was formed, it was as if she had her own consciousness. You. How is this going? Hey, Luo Zhen, she is Wulu. After Erza took out a set of clothes for Ulu to change into in the space, the eyes of Gray and Leon were full of excitement and nostalgia. The two of them didn't bother to fight anymore and rushed to Luo Zhen's face, looking at this figure with an extremely familiar face. Gray couldn't help but burst into tears and rushed forward to give this figure a hug. Impossible. Ulu is dead. Leon at the side was shocked when he saw this familiar face, and he kept talking. Gray, Leon, how did you grow up? At this time, Ulu got dressed and looked at Gray and Leon, who had grown up before him. Words came out of Ulu's mouth. Are you really you? It's Ulu. It must be you. Hearing their names from the ice mouth, Gray and Gray immediately burst into tears. Leon also trembled, walking towards Ulu with difficulty. Kneeling down in front of Ulu with a plop, Leon's tears kept dripping down the ground. With sobs in his voice, he tremblingly raised his head to look at the very familiar face in front of him. Ulu, I miss you so much. Chapter 46, Resurrected Ulu. How to break the magic. Looking at Gray and Leon kneeling in front of him. A tear also condensed in the corner of Iceman Ulu's eye, across Ice Blue's cheek, and dripped to the ground. Ulu squatted down, put his palms on the heads of Gray and Leon, and gently stroked their heads with his hands. Seeing the warm scene in front of them, Erza and Lucy were speechless in shock. Waving the wings behind him, Erza brought Lucy to Luo Zhen's side. looking at Ulu's lifelike face, and Gray and Leon who were crying bitterly. Erza asked Luo Zhen curiously, "What's wrong with the two of them? Who is this Ulu?" Luo Zhen replied with a smile, "Can't you see that Ulu is the master of Gray and Leon, who sacrificed his life to seal Dai Lionla?" Surprise flashed in everyone's eyes. Since Senior Ulu has already died, why is he resurrected in this form? And call Luo Zhenyu as the master? Lucy looked in surprise at Ulu, whose facial expression was no different from ordinary people, and asked Luo Zhen curiously, "My magic can extract the souls of other people and then endow other objects with their own life, but the target cannot be the one with life." Ulu used super magic absolute freezing to seal Dai Lion back then, and his body and soul were completely turned into this ice cube. Ulu's life has disappeared, but her soul and memory are condensed in this ice cube. After extracting the soul of Del Lion and injecting it into the ice cube, Ulu has become a brand new life created by me. It's just that URU is different from Zeus and Prometheus. URU has the memories and feelings from before, so he is a different home eyes. Luo Zhen crossed his arms and explained to Lucy beside him with a chuckle. With Luo Zhen's explanation, everyone immediately understood. Then Dai Lionla's soul is in Senior Ulu's body. Won't there be any problems? Lucy's sudden question made the whole space quiet. Both Leon and Gray raised their heads abruptly, looking at Luo Zhen with concern in their eyes. I was afraid of hearing some unacceptable bad news from Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen grinned and said, "Don't underestimate me. I don't think the attainment of soul magic belongs to anyone. When I pulled out Lion's soul, I completely wiped out part of its extremely evil soul. The rest is the purest soul body." After Luo Zhen's voice fell, Gray and Leon breathed a sigh of relief, seeing the three Ulu masters and apprentices who were weeping bitterly. Luo Zhen and others wisely walked aside and gave the three a chance to tell their hearts. "Leon, is that purple moon in the sky your fault?" After the master and apprentice got along for a while, Gray finally recovered. Pointing to the purple moon in the sky, he asked Leon. Leon nodded and said, "That's right. Sarudi told me that the moon drop can undo the seal of absolute freezing. That's why I came to this island." "Sarudi? Who is that?" Hearing this strange name, Gray was stunned for a moment, but couldn't remember the name in his mind. "He just went out with Sokka and the others to stop you. Didn't you see them?" Seeing Gray's puzzled expression, Leon continued, "You're talking about them." Gray suddenly realized that the few people just now Luo Zhen didn't give them a chance to declare themselves and directly deprive them of their source of magic power. Now they may still be tied outside the temple. Then how to untie this magic circle? Gray temporarily ignored the few people outside and quickly asked Leon. The magic circle was destroyed the moment Lionla was released. Leon spread his hands and pointed to a dilapidated magic circle not far away. Then why hasn't that purple moon in the sky disappeared? Gray frowned, looked at the alluring purple moon above his head, and frowned and said. Leon shook his head, saying that he didn't know such a thing either. Gray turned his head and found Luo Zhen and others in the distance. Tell everyone exactly what Leon just said. After learning that the magic circle had been dispelled, but the purple moon in the sky still existed, Lucy immediately became dejected. Then let's shoot down the moon. Natsu was full of fighting spirit, and the flames surged under the collision of his fists, and he turned around and was about to rush out of the cave. Stop, Natsu! Looking at Natsu's back, Erza let out a cold drink helplessly. Natsu's footsteps stayed in the air, and he turned around with a dry smile. Are you a fool? How could the moon be shot down? Poking Natsu's forehead, Erza's face was covered with black lines. Being reprimanded by Erza, Natsu stood aside dejectedly and muttered to himself, Then you don't say think of a way, then you can only shoot down the moon. Leon also looked at Natsu with strange eyes. How could anyone have such an idea? Is this guy an idiot? Go ask Sarudi. He should have a solution. After a moment of silence, Leon followed Ulu to the crowd and said to them, Sarudi is one of the guys who just got tied up by Luo Zhen. Is that the guy you're talking about? At this moment, Luo Zhen, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke, pointing to a short figure not far away. "It's him." Leon turned his head and looked in the direction Luo Zhen pointed at. A familiar figure came into view. Hey, Leon, have you betrayed us?" Seeing that he had been exposed, Saruti was no longer hiding and appeared in front of everyone, floating in midair. "We are just a cooperative relationship. My goal has been achieved, so let's terminate the cooperative relationship." Leon sneered, looked at Saruti with folded arms, and said with a sneer, "TCH, what a hassle." Looking at the wizards in fairy tale, Saruti frowned deeply. Without looking back, he rushed directly to the outside of the cave. "Stop!" Seeing that Saruti wanted to run away, Natsu suddenly jumped up from the ground. His fists were condensed with flames, and he punched Saruti directly. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. Jumping to the top of Saruti, he punched him on the back and knocked him down to the ground heavily. The smoke cleared, and Saruti stood up with a gloomy expression. He patted the dust off his body. A crystal ball floated in front of him. Chapter 47. See you next time. Altair. Puzzled Natsu saw that Saruti was still able to stand up after being punched by him. His brows were raised slightly, and he was ready to move forward with a grin. Raging flames blazed behind Natsu. His fists collided, and he walked towards Saruti step by step. Fire Dragon's Wing Strike. Natsu was picking up speed, and soon he was running, arms slanted behind him. Go straight to Saruti's figure. Seeing that Natsu was about to come up to give him a bite, Saruti's face was frosty, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The next moment, Natsu leaped high, with flames attached to his arms, and went straight towards Saruti. Just when Natsu's arm was about to hit Saruti's face, the crystal ball in front of him suddenly moved and blocked Saruti's body. The crystal ball turned into an afterimage and appeared in front of Natsu in the blink of an eye. A heavy blow. When Natsu was about to touch Saruti one step ahead, Natsu was directly knocked out. The crystal ball slowly floated back to Saruti, looking at everyone with a sneer on his face. "Damn it!" Natsu in the smoke let out a roar, and then Natsu's figure rushed out of the smoke and went straight to Saruti. But the next few times, Natsu hit Saruti and was knocked out by his crystal ball. Saruti frowned deeply, looking at Natsu, who was roaring and rushing towards him again, feeling impatient. "Let's get rid of you with one move." The magic circle under the feet condensed, and the magic power continuously poured into the crystal ball. The crystal ball exploded with a bang and appeared in front of Natsu in an instant. Just when the crystal ball was about to hit Natsu's face, an ice wall suddenly rose in front of Natsu, blocking the crystal ball's attack. The crystal ball was inlaid on the ice wall and was still spinning. The sudden appearance of the ice wall made the rushing Natsu have to stop. Dissatisfied, he turned his head to Gray and shouted, "You Ice BD, don't interfere in my battle." Gray was full of doubts. He didn't use this magic himself. Glancing at Leon, he saw him looking at him with the same puzzled eyes. At this time, the two reacted and turned their eyes to Ulu behind them. I saw Ulu making the same movements as Gray, and a miniature magic circle was condensed on the fist. "Ulu, is that you?" Gray looked at Ulu, who was using magic, in surprise. "How about it? Master strength is not bad." Ulu grinned and wiped the tip of his nose with his finger. "Damn it." Saruti glanced at Ulu bitterly, turned his head, and wanted to rush out of the underground cave and leave here. Suddenly, a terrifying breath enveloped it. Saruti's face instantly became extremely pale, and his whole body seemed to be suppressed by a mountain. With difficulty, he stretched out his palm and grabbed the crystal ball beside him. The Ark of Time, the glory of all gods, suddenly let go of the crystal ball in his hand, letting it float freely into the air. The next moment, a series of bright attacks appeared in the narrow cave, and they went straight to Luo Zhen beside Erza. Saruti also knew that the only person present with such strength was Luo Zhen. As long as Luo Zhen is dealt with, everyone is no match for him. With a wave of his right hand, Luo Zhen directly blocked the attacks from all directions. With a sudden step on the ground with both feet, the ground collapsed, and Luo Zhen appeared in front of Saruti in the blink of an eye. Under the terrifying coercion, Suruti suddenly felt fear in his heart. Horror flashed in his eyes, and he quickly avoided meeting Luo Zhen's gaze. Just now he saw with his own eyes how Luo Zhen extracted the soul of Dai Lion from his body. Seeing Luo Zhen's familiar movements, he thought that Luo Zhen also wanted to extract his own soul. The body is constantly struggling, pushing and beating Luo Zhen with hands and feet. Throwing Suruti out heavily, he said calmly, "How to get rid of the purple moon on Galuna Island?" Being thrown to the ground by Luo Zhen, Suruti covered his neck and coughed twice. The formation of the moondrop is to form a thin film over Galuna Island. The moonlight passes through the thin film to form a purple moon. You only need to smash the thin film covering Galuna Island to relieve the residents of this island. Problem: Suruti was shocked and panicked. No matter how he faced anyone, he was not as terrified as he was facing the man in front of him. "I see. Let's go," Luo Zhen nodded, not intending to settle accounts with Suruti. Originally thought that he was going to die here completely today, but when he suddenly heard Luo Zhen's words, Suruti suddenly raised his head and looked at Luo Zhen in disbelief. "You said let me go?" Suruti looked at Luo Zhen in surprise and pointed at himself. "Some suspect that they have heard wrong. Don't go, right?" "Then don't go," Luo Zhen frowned, and the magic power overflowed Luo Zhen's body, and he was about to step forward to kill Suruti. Seeing that Luo Zhen really wanted to let him go, Suruti summoned the crystal ball to his side without the slightest hesitation and disappeared from everyone's sight after a while. "See you next time, Altair." The moment Suruti left, a familiar voice suddenly reached his ears. Turning his head sharply to take a look at Luo Zhen, his eyes were full of shock. Why? Why would he know his identity? I have never come into contact with this monster in front of me. Looking at the slightly raised corners of Luo Zhen's mouth, Altair was even more puzzled. Is it really okay to let him go? Coming to Luo Zhen's side, Erza looked at Luo Zhen's profile and asked. Luo Zhen shrugged and said with a smile, "It's not that we have to kill each other. Why do we have to kill each other?" Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza nodded in agreement. But if those souls who died under Luo Zhen's hands heard this sentence, would they roar at Luo Zhen? "Let's get out of here. I already know how to complete the mission on this island." Turning his head, he shouted to Lucy Nat Su and others behind him. Everyone hurriedly followed Luo Zhen's back and walked towards the outside of the temple. Gray looked at Ulu, who was also following, and walked beside Ulu without the slightest hesitation. Leon also hesitated for a moment and followed. Leon and several companions were tied up and thrown outside. When Luo Zhen and others appeared, their eyes revealed despair. Now that Luo Zhen and the others have appeared, does it mean that Leon is also defeated by them? But when they saw Leon following closely behind, they were stunned. Puzzled. Chapter 48: The world will be destroyed. "Leon, what's going on?" Seeing that there were only some signs of fighting on Leon's body, but he didn't look injured, several people couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Leon waved his hand and remained silent without answering the words of the few people. Several people saw that Leon didn't want to say anything, so they didn't continue to ask. Suddenly, the eyes of several people fell on the woman covered in icy blue. They remembered that there was no such woman when they went in before. Why suddenly more people came out now? And this woman didn't look like a normal person. Her whole body was covered in ice blue, as if she was made of ice. And they also saw that Leon and the shirtless man in their group seemed to be very familiar with this woman. The three walked together so closely. The people who were tied up looked at each other, completely puzzled. Luo Zhen lifted the deprived magic power from several people and felt the magic power gushing out of their bodies again. Tears filled their eyes instantly. It's good to have that familiar feeling back. "Leon, what's going on with us now?" The people whose limbs were untied followed behind Leon, and one of them, a man wearing a dog head mask, approached Leon curiously and asked. Leon was silent for a moment and said to several people, "We lost. Dai Lion's seal was lifted, but he was also killed." As Leon's words fell, the expressions of several people changed suddenly. They're all survivors of the Dai Lion disaster when they were young. Under the destruction of Dai Lion, they survived under the protection of their relatives. Dai Lion La was killed, several people were silent, and a line of hot tears flowed from their eyes. Everyone left the temple and went down the mountain. Back in the village, Leon and the others couldn't help being startled when they saw this group of demon-like villagers. Seeing that Leon and the others were taken aback, Gray glanced at him with a sneer and said, "It's all because of the moondrop magic you're doing here that the villagers on the island are cursed. The few people are not bad, and they also showed shame when they heard this." Looking from a distance, there is a thin purple film in the sky. If you don't check carefully in the middle of the night, you can't see the appearance of the film at all. Changing clothes, Tianluan's sword. Since as long as the film is destroyed, the curse on the island can be lifted. Erza immediately switched to the Tianluan armor and rushed to the sky with 2 long swords in his hand. With the flying of the sharp blade, dozens of sharp, long swords shot straight into the sky, try to destroy the film in one fell swoop. But the distance of the film is too far. Even if Erza used all his strength, the long sword could not reach the desired height. Unwilling to fall to the ground, Erza continued to switch Kurobo armor, flapping its wings and flying into the air. An afterimage of black flashed under the dark moon sky. Holding the Kurobo long sword, he shot straight at the membrane in the sky. Standing in the center of the village, Luo Zhen frowned, looking at the ultra-long-distance purple film in the sky of Li Tian, feeling a little dignified in his heart. Most of Luo Zhen's abilities are on the ground. It is really difficult for Luo Zhen to rush to such a high distance. After Erza returned to the ground, he shook his head helplessly. "Let me try it." Taking a deep breath, he asked the village chief not far away for a long knife. As Luo Zhen gathered all his strength, he threw the long knife, and a streak of light streaked across the air, shooting straight into the sky like a shooting star. But the difference is that the meteor is from top to bottom, and this kind of streamer is from bottom to top. The speed of the long knife, thrown with all his strength in the air, directly exceeded the speed of sound, and bursts of sonic booms exploded in the air. The long knife stabbed fiercely on a hard barrier, but failed to penetrate the barrier. The knowledgeable domineering sensed this scene, and Luo Zhen also showed helplessness. Why doesn't Luo Zhen use magic? Suddenly, Lucy on the side spoke. Luo Zhen spread his hands and said helplessly, "Soul magic is useless, and vibration magic is not used. This is an island. If vibration magic is used, it can indeed destroy the film on it, but it may also cause a tsunami. And the port city not far away." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Lucy couldn't help swallowing. So scary. Taking a deep breath, Luo Zhen summoned Zeus over. Jumping on the back of Zeus, Luo Zhen commanded Zeus to soar into the sky. Zeus's speed was extremely fast, and after a while Lucy and others couldn't see the figures of the two clearly. Coming to the top, Luo Zhen could clearly see the hard barrier above. "Zeus, come closer." Seeing this purple film, Luo Zhen nodded in satisfaction and directed Zeus to approach. Zeus, who received the order, approached and came to the side of the purple film. The moment he approached, Luo Zhen gathered all his strength and slammed his fist heavily on the barrier. In an instant, the barrier shattered, and the sound of the explosion resounded through the sky, echoing in the empty sky. The barrier is shattering, turning into bits of purple starlight and melting into the darkness. Erza and the others on the ground showed joy, seeing the gradually disappearing purple barrier. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. With the disappearance of the purple barrier, the bright moonlight falls. Bathed in the light of the silver-white moon, the villagers closed their eyes, waiting for their curse to be broken. Suddenly, stretching out his hands, the village head bathed in the moonlight opened his eyes. His figure has not recovered at all, but there is a different look in his eyes. His clansmen also gradually opened their eyes and looked at each other silently. The figure of Luo Zhen returned to the ground and came in front of Erza and others. Erza frowned, looking at the villagers who had no intention of recovering. He couldn't help asking, "Hasn't the curse been broken yet?" "No, the curse has been lifted." A smile appeared on the ferocious face of the village chief, and he walked in front of Erza and the others. But you..." Hearing what the village chief said, Lucy was still a little scared looking at his ferocious face and stuck her head out from behind Luo Zhen and Erza. Yes, this is what we are. The curse is not this, the village chief grinned, and such a smile made the already ferocious face even more terrifying. What? The words of the village chief shocked everyone except Luo Zhen. Following the village chief's explanation, everyone knew. The villagers on this island are not human beings at all. They are originally a demon-like race. They are able to switch between humans and demons. It's just that they were affected by the drops of the moon, making them forget their identities and their abilities. After seeing his demon face, he thought the island was cursed. Chapter 49 URU is my home eyes. A ship sails on the sea. This is because the village head of the island sent someone to send Luo Zhen and others to leave the island in order to thank Luo Zhen and others. And the person who saw him off happened to be the man who brought Nat Su and others to the island, the son of the village chief. At this time, he has recovered the appearance of a human being, propping up the boat and sailing on the sea. Sitting on the deck, the sea breeze gently blows on Luo Zhen's face. Erza sat beside Luo Zhen, hugged Luo Zhen's arm, and leaned his head on Luo Zhen's shoulder. The sea breeze blows Erza Scarlet's long hair, blowing it slightly fluttering. Luo Zhen, after Nat Su and the others go back. How will the president punish them? Looking up, looking at Lucy's profile with some worry, he asked, "Don't worry. The president is a knife-mouthed bean curd heart, although he said he would punish Nat Su and the others. But in the end, big things will be turned into small things, and small things will be turned into small things." Luo Zhen stretched out his hand and gently rubbed Erza, Fei Red's long hair, and replied with a chuckle. After hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza also thought of the character of the groom Carlo. Covering his mouth, he laughed lightly and said with a smile, "That's right, the president treats everyone in the guild like his family. Even if there's a punishment, it won't be serious." Although Erza said so, Lucy, who was not far away, had already started to get scared. Sitting tremblingly in the corner of Class A, Gray, Leon, and URU sat in the cabin. The two truthfully told Ulu some things that had happened in these years, as if a child who had been away from home for many years suddenly saw his mother and confide to his mother the bitterness he had suffered in these years. Ulu stretched out his ice-cold blue hands and gently landed on the heads of Gray and Leon in front of him. With a gentle smile on his face, he said to the two of them with a smile, "You brothers must live in harmony, and you will have to walk side by side in the days to come." Gray and Leon glanced at each other, both seeing disdain in each other's eyes. The two snorted coldly and turned their heads away, not looking at each other. Ulu smiled, not paying attention to the funny scene of the two little guys in front of him. After Ulu was resurrected in this way, he was no longer the same as the previous Ulu. Although Ulu now has his own life again and has all his own memories. But the current Ulu belongs to Luo Zhen. "Ulu, come back to Fairy Tale with me. We will always be together." Suddenly, Gray raised his head, looked at Ulu, and said expectantly, "Hey, what nonsense are you kidding? Ulu must be with me." Without waiting for Ulu to answer, Leon directly interrupted Gray's words, grabbed Gray's collar, and shouted loudly, "Leon, you wanted to destroy Ulu before, so I won't give Ulu to you." Gray was also not to be outdone. Grabbed Leon's clothes and turned back. In the narrow cabin, two people were pushing back and forth. Soon the movement inside the cabin caught the attention of everyone outside. Natsu was lying on the deck, passed out with a big lump on his head, obviously knocked unconscious by someone. Erza came to the cabin with a bad face, looking at Gray and Leon who were wrestling. "Stop!" Erza shouted loudly, staring at the two with unfriendly eyes. Hearing Erza's voice, Gray subconsciously withdrew his arm. The next moment, a fist hit Gray's face heavily, and Leon looked at Gray, who was hit by his punch, with disdain. Can't this work?" Leon smiled coldly, looked at the fist marks on Gray's face, and raised his head proudly. But before Leon was proud for a while, he suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from behind him. I saw that Erza had already stood behind Leon at some point and punched Leon heavily on the back of the head. Leon turned around with a cold face, reached out, and touched the back of his head. Immediately after rolling his eyes, he fell to the ground and passed out. Fool! Gray rubbed the place where he was punched on his face and looked at Leon, who was knocked out by Erza's punch, with a smirk on his face. Not long after, Leon, who had passed out, woke up slowly. Looking at putting himself on the deck, Gray and Ulu are sitting beside him. Leon rubbed the back of his head, frowning and feeling some pain. Silently glanced at Erza not far away. And when Erza glanced over, Leon quickly looked away. Ulu, let's leave after we get off the boat. The first thing Leon did when he woke up was to talk to Ulu. You is going to follow me back to Fairy Tale. Before Ulu could answer, the two started arguing again. If it weren't for Erza's unfriendly gaze scanning the two would probably continue to fight. Suddenly, a calm voice reached the ears of the two. You seem to have forgotten me. Following the sound, Luo Zhen was lying lazily on the deck, raising his hands and smiling at the noisy two. Luo Zhen, what do you mean by what you just said? Gray frowned, suddenly feeling ominous. Ulu will not follow any of you. You is mine now, Luo Zhen grinned, looked at the noisy two senior brothers and said. As soon as Luo Zhen's words fell, Leon stood up with an unkind expression. Looking straight at Luo Zhen, he asked word by word, what do you mean by your sentence? If you don't explain clearly, even if I can't beat you, I will fight you. In Leon's heart, Ulu will always be ranked first, and no one is allowed to defile Ulu. Literally, Luo Zhen didn't care about the threat from Irian at all, and sat up with his arms propped up, with a smile on his calm face. Hey, don't be joking. Ulu is alone. How could it belong to you? Leon stood on the deck and shouted at Luo Zhen angrily. Who told you that Ulu is still alone now? Luo Zhen smiled coldly. Looking at the icy blue Ulu, Luo Zhen continued. Ulu is now the...
No more novels? Take part in the voting. The most requested novels and those with the most likes will be chosen for publication on euroaudiobooks.com. There, I can upload as much as I want without the risk of receiving a strike. Our 18 novels and other content that exceed what is morally acceptable are only published on Patreon or the free novels page. Remember, the site is funded by donations on Ko-fi and Patreon memberships.